Hello guys, it's your friend Naruto Fanfics, back again with another awesome fanfic. Which is what if Banished Naruto became Emperor of the West with Kurama and dragons? Part 1. If you enjoy it, please show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing for more fanfics like this. And now let's get started. Naruto stared at the ceiling and wondered where he went wrong. He had brought back Sasuke even after suffering not one but two Chidoris to the chest, but was that enough for him to gain acceptance from the populace of Konoha? Nope. And to make matters worse, Sakura blamed him for the excessive injuries of Sasuke. All Sasuke was unconscious with a few cuts and bruises. He almost died. But the worst of the news came just after he woke from his 2-day coma. Flashback. The nurse that was tending to him left with a scowl on her face after confirming he was going to be fine. It was quite obvious she had been ordered to take care of him, but he didn't care. Naruto grinned like a madman. He had done it. He kept his promise to Sakura and brought back Sasuke. His thoughts were halted with the entry of a pink-haired girl. Somehow Naruto's grin widened at the sight of her. "Hey Sakura-chan. I did it. I brought back Sasuke, just like I promised," he yelled excitedly. "How could you?" Sakura yelled, pounding her fists on top of Naruto's head. "I trusted you. You almost killed him." Sakura raised her fists to continue her beating, but a stern voice broke through. "Enough, Sakura." Said person turned to the voice and came upon the sight of Tsunade with her arms crossed looking at her. "Leave," was the simple command which Sakura obeyed immediately. She bowed to Tsunade and left the room quietly, sending one final searing glare at Naruto, who was still recovering on the bed, before closing the door. Tsunade turned to Naruto and her gaze softened. She moved to the bed and sat on it and started to lessen the pain in his head. Naruto's body visibly relaxed due to the healing and he slumped into his bed once more. Naruto smiled lightly. "Thanks Ba-chan," he said softly. Tsunade looked ready to pound him herself for a moment but stopped herself. Her face became downtrodden at the implication of what happened. "Naruto," Tsunade began, "due to the injuries of Uchiha Sasuke and your excessive use of the Kyuubi's power during your retrieval mission, your shinobi license has been revoked and you have been banished from Konoha." By now she was in tears. "I'm so sorry Naruto." Naruto was silent, his eyes wide. His mouth moved but no sound came out. Eventually he spoke. "But can't you do anything?" he said hopefully. "I'm sorry, but the council can banish somebody if it's a unanimous decision. They went behind my back. There is nothing I could do." Naruto closed his eyes to hide the tears building in them. How long do I have to leave?" he asked. "You have to be gone by the end of the week." Naruto merely nodded in response. Being unable to speak at the time, Tsunade stood and silently walked towards the door. She cast a final look back towards Naruto and walked out the room, closing the door behind her. Flashback end. Now he was just staring at the ceiling. Thinking. Lots of thinking. No one had come to visit him apart from Iruka, but even he could only stay for so long. But hey, he brought him ramen. That was all worth it. Not even his sensei, Kakashi, had come to see him. Or his so-called friends. Sighing, he gave up thinking. He was never good at it anyway. He closed his eyes and relaxed in his bed, settling down to sleep. Mindscape. Naruto opened his eyes to the dark, damp sewers of his mind. Sighing, he proceeded forward down the tunnels, wondering what the damn fox wanted now. Naruto turned the corner and came up to the gates of the seal. The large fox was lying on his haunches behind it. Naruto looked at it for a short time before starting the conversation. "What is it you want, furball? Want to mock me about my recent failure like all my other pitiful kind?" he drawled. Kyuubi didn't answer and just started at Naruto. Naruto shifted under the piercing gaze the fox was giving him. Finally he spoke. This is quite the predicament you've landed us in. Naruto snorted. Is that it? Is that all you wanted to say? He questioned. Seeing the situation we are in, I am willing to resolve our differences so that we can aid each other. Kyuubi replied. Naruto raised an eyebrow. You want to help me? Naruto couldn't help it and burst out laughing. Kyuubi was quickly losing patience with the laughing blonde that was now rolling on the floor, when he finally snapped, "Silence!" He roared, infusing his killing intent within his voice. Naruto was on his feet, silenced immediately. Now if you would be so kind as to listen, you pathetic bag of flesh, I would explain. Naruto mutely nodded. As you no doubt have guessed, we are in a lot of trouble. I am stuck in your body and I don't want to die yet. So I am going to give you an offer. Kyuubi said. Oh, and what does the great Kyuubi-sama want to offer a lowly me? Naruto asked. Kyuubi growled but kept silent. I am willing to make a deal with you. I will give you training and offer my chakra whenever you need it. In return you will listen to my advice when given. Give me a change of scenery in this place and rip a piece of the seal off so I can access your senses. He said. Okay, and how do I know you're telling the truth and by ripping the seal you won't try and escape? Naruto said in return. Kyuubi narrowed his eyes but pushed a scroll forward through the bars with his tail. This is the summoning contract for the dragons. As a sign of my faith I will allow you to sign it in place of the Toad contract. You will undoubtedly lose due to the contract being loyal to Konoha. The boss summon is my friend. Kyuubi said. If you explain to him that I am sealed within you, he should allow you to be their contract holder. Kyuubi explained. Naruto stared at Kyuubi silently, contemplating the request. As Naruto continued contemplating, he closed his eyes. The sewer walls of his mind began to blur out and was soon replaced by a luscious green forest with everything enlarged. The trees grew taller than the Kyuubi himself and large animals roamed around. Naruto opened his eyes to see Kyuubi looking around his surroundings with a collar around his neck and the seal hanging from it. Is this satisfactory? He asked. Kyuubi looked down at Naruto and nodded. Naruto walked forward towards the scroll as Kyuubi pounded off towards a rather tasty-looking giant rabbit that caught his eye. He opened the scroll and had noticed that no one else had signed it. Copying what he did with the Toad contract, he cut a finger on one of his canines and signed his name in blood. He rolled the scroll back up just and Kyuubi came back after licking his lips from whatever meal he just had. Okay, it's done, he said. I'll do the seal when we are out of Konoha. Kyuubi nodded. That's fine. It'd be best if you woke up. You'll probably want to leave before dawn. Naruto nodded and faded from his mind. Hospital room. Naruto yawned as he opened his eyes. As he stretched, he looked out the window. He saw the sun falling quickly behind the trees, casting the sky in deep oranges and reds. Anbu-san? He asked softly as he sat up in bed. He looked to his right when he heard a pop. He saw an Anbu wearing a boar mask standing next to the bed. I'm feeling strong enough to move, he said while stretching. He was a little stiff, but that would fade when he started to move. I was wondering if you could shunshin back to my apartment. Or are you under strict instructions to keep me here? He asked. The Anbu replied in a gruff voice. My orders were to protect you, and if taking you home with do that, then I shall comply. If you are doing what I think you are, then it is the best course of action. He said simply. Oh, and what do you think I am doing, Anbu-san? Naruto questioned as he stood up and started putting on some clothes. You are going to pack so you can leave before dawn, so you can avoid the civilians that will most likely appear to run you out of Konoha. Boar explained. Hit the nail on the head there, Boar. So will you help me? He asked, putting on the last of his clothing. Of course, I'm sure. If you asked any other Anbu, they'd also be glad to help. Boar explained before putting his hand on Naruto's shoulder and shunshin to his home. Boar was actually sad to see Naruto go, as was many of the Anbu in the Corps, due to the respect they held for him. Many admitted that they could not have survived what he had and still remained sane. Most of the Anbu knew why he did the pranks in the first place. It was so he could have fun while running from them. The only real time he could. As such, the Anbu respected his wishes and didn't chase after him seriously and let him have his fun. Apartment. When they arrived, Boar immediately sunshined out again. Naruto was confused for a moment but shrugged, thinking he had to do some important Anbu stuff. He walked to the kitchen to get something to eat before packing. Once he had done so, he moved to his bedroom and began shoving any essentials into the rucksack he had. After having trouble closing the bag, he set it down by the door. He walked to the bed and knelt down by it. After some trouble, he shoved it over, revealing a floorboard that was a different shade than the others. Grabbing a nearby kunai, he pried open the board, revealing a secret compartment. Reaching inside, he grabbed the contents and set them on his bed. This revealed a small box about the length of his forearm, a face mask akin to that of Kakashi, and black cloak with a hood that would cover him to his calves. He moved to his dresser and took out some black clothes he had saved just for a time like this. He may be dense, but he always prepared for the worst. And it appeared it was the best option. After getting changed, he moved back into the kitchen and set his bag on the counter and put the box on the table. Opening it, it revealed a small blade called a tanto. He slowly ran his hand over the sheath of it and remembered the Sandaime giving it to him as a birthday present a few years ago. He had also shared his thoughts on whether the situation at hand would come to pass and helped him prepare. He had provided most of the things he needed. One of the main things was that he helped him study geography to help him navigate the surrounding area. He was preparing to leave and finished making some gifts that he had got some people to thank them for being nice to him. For Tsunade he got some finer sake, something he could afford yet still good quality. For the Ichirakus he gave them a good portion of his savings to make up for all the free ramen they gave him so he wouldn't go hungry. And for Iruka he gave him back his headband that he gifted himself on the night he became a ninja. A pop resounded around the apartment just as Naruto was about to open the door. He turned to look and saw Boar with scroll in his hand. He walked up to him when he held the scroll out to him. When he opened it, he realized it was a map of all the Anbu patrols near Konoha. A gift from us to help you escape without anyone seeing you. Just make sure to burn it when you get past them so it doesn't fall into enemy hands. Boar said. Naruto nodded his thanks. Thanks, and tell that to all the Anbu as well. I know you weren't serious when you chased me after my pranks and you helped me when some villagers decided to go fox hunting. You have my eternal gratitude. Boar bowed slightly in return. Oh, and a last favor. I was wondering if you could deliver these for me. He asked, handing Boar 3 scroll containing the gifts. Boar nodded and disappeared. Naruto looked around the apartment one last time. Before opening the door and walking out. He didn't bother locking it this time around as he wouldn't be going back. Stepping out his apartment block, he breathed in the air and shouldered his rucksack. Looking down the empty streets, he shrugged and took to the rooftops and ran in the direction of the gate. He was nearing the gate when he suddenly stopped and looked at a random direction towards the forest. He looked back towards the gate again and then back to the forest before shrugging and running in that direction. Namikaze clan compound. Naruto stood in front of the compound gates. Something had always bothered him since the day he found out about Kyuubi. Why him? He had read in some books that the Yondaime was a selfless man and would put Konoha before himself. And his face. He was the spitting image of the Namikaze. He was surprised that no one else had seen it. Though he guessed it was because they were too busy hating him to look at the similarities between him and the Yondaime. He stayed staring at the gate for a little while longer before walking up to it and nicking his thumb on a canine and swiping it on the gate. Naruto waited with bated breath as he watched the seals glow for a while before disappearing and the gate opened. The clan compound appeared modest with a large 3-story house, with each level getting progressively smaller as it went up, in the center and gardens surrounding it. Along the path towards the house were sakura trees, lining the way forwards. Naruto took a deep breath and stepped through and listened as the gate closed behind him. He continued walking and eventually ended up at the door. He looked at the handle no firmly in his grasp, apprehensive of what was to come. Eventually he turned it and walked into the building, closing the door behind him. He walked to the wall and flicked on the hallway light. As light illuminated the hall, Naruto gazed at the decorations. The wall was a soft blue with white highlights. Pictures of a blonde-haired man and a beautiful red-haired woman hung on the walls, lining it with more colors. Naruto drifted around the ground floor looking in rooms and admiring the decorations. He eventually advanced to the second level. There he found many empty rooms and storages. The only notable thing he found was the Yondaime's study. He left the door open and carried on, leaving it to rummage through it after he found the reason he was here in the first place. After passing more storage and empty rooms, he made it to the third level. There were only 4 doors on this level, 2 on one side, 1 on the other, and the last at the end of the hall. Naruto started with the door closest to him. It appeared to be the master bedroom. It was a big room but sparsely populated. The centerpiece of the room was a king-sized bed, with red covers and black pillows with a gold Uzumaki crest in the center of the covers. The wall on the right was taken up by drawers and wardrobes, most likely filled to the brim with clothes and outfits. On the other wall was a desk with bookshelves either side with a few books and scrolls upon them. What caught his attention was the large scroll on the desk. Naruto walked towards it. He picked it up and began inspecting it. He froze when he came across a name. To Naruto. Said person almost dropped the scroll in his shock. He stared at the scroll and began wondering what to do. He was scared. Scared of what the Yondaime was going to say to him. Warily he went to open the scroll, but when it didn't budge he realized it was locked with a blood seal. Nicking his finger he swiped it over his name and watched it glow before disappearing. When he opened the scroll, 5 things fell out. They included 2 envelopes, both with his name on, a katana with a red sheath and black handle, a small black book which was quite thick, and another scroll. First he opened one of the envelopes and began reading. Dear Naruto, you are probably wondering who I am. Well, for starters, I am your father, or was. But I am more commonly known as the Yondaime Hokage. And first of all I wanted to say is that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving you alone, and I'm sorry for sealing the Kyuubi in you. Despite my wishes, I also doubt that the village will see you as a hero. I was the Hokage. I know how the villagers will take this. I only hope that more senior members of the ninja society will abide by my wishes. Though that I also doubt. I know what fear and hate does to people. If your mother dies as well, then know that your godparents should be willing to take you in. Your godfather is Jiraiya of the Sannin, and your godmother is Makoto Uchiha. She was your mother's best friend. I can't write for any longer. The Kyuubi is almost at our gates and the ninja fighting it are wavering, so I have to go. Just know that I will always love you. And I'm leaving you my book of seals, the Black Book, and the entirety of the Namikaze and Uzumaki vaults, which comes to around 37.6 million ryo. Just remember, I will always love you. Love, your father. Naruto stared at the letter in his hand with tears welling in his eyes. It confirmed both his best dream and worst fear. He had always hoped to know who his parents were, and the Yondaime was his freaking father. He was ecstatic, but his emotions took a dip when he realized that his own father had sealed the being that made his life a living hell for 13 years of his life. After getting a hold of his emotions, he put down the letter from his father. He picked up the one from his mother. Opening it, he read. To Naruto. My dear little boy, I am so sorry to leave you without parents, but just know that the time I held you in my arms, despite how small, were the best in my life. My name is Kushina Uzumaki and I am your mother if you already didn't know that. I have little time to write this as I have to aid your father in defeating Kyuubi and I know the way he is going to do it and for that I'm sorry. I hope that my friend Makoto will take you in after we pass and I hope you will enjoy your life there. She was my best friend and I thought of her as my sister. For you I leave the Uzumaki Book of Seals which I included with you fathers making it a joint Uzumaki and Namikaze Seals book. Learn well and become a seal master that surpasses both me and your father. I also leave you my katana named Ketsuki Shirudo. I hope it serves you well. And remember, like you father, I will always love you with all my heart. Love your mother. And stuck to the bottom of the letter was a picture of his father and pregnant mother standing hand in hand smiling at the camera. When he saw this his tears finally began to fall. It was his first and last photo with his parents. Smiling as his tears stopped he took off the photo and put it into his cloak. He grabbed the katana and unsheathed it revealing a black blade with a silver edging to it. In Naruto's opinion it was quite beautiful. He resheathed it and put everything back in the scroll and resealed it and turned to leave the room. Leaving the room with the scroll firmly tucked into his cloak he closed the door and moved on to the next. Opening it he almost fell to his knees but he held his body upright by grabbing onto the wall. The room was a nursery. The walls were painted a soft orange with red Uzumaki swirls dotted around. When he eventually collapsed to his knees, it wasn't because of the decorations on the walls. It was because of a name imprinted in gold on the crib which sat in the corner of the room. Naruto. He continued to stare at the name. His name. This was his room. He would have grown up here. After gathering himself he left the room. He explored the other doors. The room on the right was a bathroom lined with light blue and cream-colored tiles. The room at the end turned out to be just storage like many others on the lower level. Naruto later returned to his father's study. His father. The concept that the Yondaime was his father still hadn't fully caught up with him. How could the man hailed as the strongest and fastest ninja in his time be his father, a boy who failed the academy 3 times and can't even throw a punch right? Then again that wasn't exactly his fault. If he had some proper teachers he could at least be Chunin, maybe even Jonin. We'll never know. And so Naruto began exploring the study. Looking through documents and papers trying to see if anything caught his interest. When he was inspecting the books on the shelves he spotted a peculiar book. The name read, Tale of an Utterly Gutsy Ninja. But it wasn't the name that drew his eye to the book. It was the author, Jiraiya. Naruto was shocked. The man who was known worldwide for his porn writes a book that didn't seem to be porn. Naruto reached to the book to take it off the shelf, but when he did the strangest thing happened. The bookcase's back which the book sat on began to glow. When the glow died the bookcase began to fade out and eventually disappeared, revealing a staircase in the wall. Naruto shrugged before mumbling, "The wonders of seals, I guess," and proceeded to march down the stairs. The stairs were dark and he almost tripped every once in a while. When he eventually reached the bottom the staircase opened up into a bright room. But it was not that, which made Naruto stop and gape in wonder. It was the rows and rows of jutsu scrolls and books piled onto shelves. There were jutsu for each element, genjutsu, taijutsu, and kenjutsu. Naruto began looking at the scrolls in bewilderment. Awed at the collection his parents had made. He eventually made it to the end of the room, where a larger shelf stood. Upon said shelf were 3 scrolls and a case similar to the one that held his tanto. He picked up the scrolls to see what they were. One was the taijutsu style for his father, the hummingbird, another was his mother's kenjutsu style, bloody whirlpool, and the final scroll were the jutsu scrolls for Hiraishin and Rasengan. He put the scrolls back down and turned to the box. Opening it he found 103-pronged kunai. Naruto looked around the room and frowned, so many jutsu going to waste. Naruto wandered the room for a while when he eventually came across a cabinet full of empty sealing scrolls, so he grabbed a few and started sealing everything. He sealed the elemental techniques into their separate, sealed the other disciplines of jutsu separate as well, and sealed that all into another scroll and put that in his cloak as well. Naruto made his way back upstairs and out the door, and walked to the gate. When he was outside he turned to look at the compound. He sighed sadly, closed the gates and ran off in the directions away from Konoha. A few hours later, Naruto sat at the bottom of a tree resting. He had been running for ages and even his stamina had its limits. He had just finished burning the scroll that Boar had given him, as he had made it past all of the patrols that he should be concerned with. He decided this was a good place to release part of Kyuubi's seal because he was far enough away that if some chakra escaped it wouldn't be felt, and if it did he would be long gone by the time that they arrived. Sitting down he tried to meditate to appear back in his mindscape. Naruto appeared in the now luscious forest of his mind and went to find the giant orange fox that inhabited it. After walking for a while he found said fox lying on his back with his belly extended and multiple corpses of animals littered around. Naruto's sweat dropped at the pleased grin on Kyuubi's face. Ahem! Naruto shouted, trying to get the fox's attention. The giant being, startled by Naruto's sudden appearance, bolted up and let out a rather high-pitched yelp, which was quite comical when the thing making it is the same size as the Hokage mountain. When he had settled down he glared at Naruto for disturbing his rest. "What is it you want, Kit?" he asked. "Kit?" Naruto asked. "Kits are baby foxes. I thought it would be fitting," he replied. "Oh, anyway I came to do the seal," Naruto said, walking up to Kyuubi, who leant down so that Naruto could reach the seal. When he did he hesitated. "There won't be any side effects, will there? Like I won't suddenly get a tail?" he asked. Kyuubi chuckled. "No, you won't get a tail. Your senses may improve, but other than that I don't think so." Naruto nodded and ripped part of the seal. The sudden increase of demon chakra was slightly painful but nothing that he couldn't handle. Forest. Naruto awoke and quickly became aware that his senses were defiantly better. He looked behind him to check if he had a tail and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw he didn't. He had another thought and quickly pulled out a kunai to see if it had some ears and smiled when he realized he didn't. He did see though that his hair now had some red highlights. He actually quite liked it. Pocketing the kunai he wondered out loud, "Where to go? I know a place." A voice resonated in his mind which made Naruto leap 10 feet in the air. "How are you talking to me?" Naruto asked after recovering. "After you ripped the seal I was able to establish a mind link so we can talk without you coming into your mind to do so," Kyuubi said. "Ah, so what were you saying?" "Go west, away from the elemental nations, no one would think to look for you there." "Okay, west I go." "Oh, and Kyuubi, what's your name?" I kind of figured that Kyuubi was a title. "Oh, it's Kurama." "Right, thanks Kurama," Naruto said. "Don't worry about it, Kit. Now get going, it's going to be dawn soon. You want to be out of Fire Country by then." "All right, let's get going," yelled Naruto. Naruto stirred from his position on the grass underneath a bush. Opening his ocean blue eyes he stared straight up at the sky and the suspiciously high sun in the sky. "Kurama," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. He heard a yawn in the back of his mind before a voice replied to him. "What's up, Kit?" said Fox replied. "What time is it?" his voice having an edge to it. "About midday," he answered in a carefree tone. "What?" Naruto yelled, shooting up from his position, apparently forgetting that he was under a bush, which was now evident from the amount of twigs and leaves now stuck in his mouth. Spitting out the debris, "Why didn't you wake me at dawn?" he shouted accusingly. "Because you're exhausted, Naruto." Kurama tried to reason. "With the amount of leaf nins, missing nins, and bandits that have been trying to kill you the past week, it has only been down to luck that you're still alive. You needed your rest." He finished. Naruto sighed and calmed down somewhat. It was true after all. Konoha had been throwing the world at him as he ran. The odd Chunin team would show up declaring that they would clear the world of his taint, for the good of the council. Thankfully mass shadow clones are rather confusing. Missing nins and bandits were also a problem. Apparently they had been paid to kill him with a rather large amount of money, pricks. The bandits were no problem even with his lack of training. The missing nin however were dealt the same way the Chunins were. The shadow clone jutsu was rather quickly becoming his favorite. Sadly though he didn't always come out unscathed, he was now covered in a myriad of cuts and bruises that were slowly healing courtesy of the demon fox, though apparently a few would scar over according to him. He didn't care. Looked more badass, in his opinion. Where are we now? Naruto asked while packing away his impromptu campsite. At the edge of bird country. In a day or two you should reach the first western province. Kurama answered. Province? Naruto asked, slightly confused. Yes, that's what I said. Once upon a time, when I was still a little fox, not any less powerful mind you, the West was a great empire. However, the lords who lived in these lands were greedy people, and when the emperor of the West fell ill and later died leaving no heirs, the lords of the West couldn't decide who the land would go to and a large war erupted in the West splitting it apart. Although it has died down in this era, the warlords of the West are still greedy and battle each other constantly, and the civilians there pay for it, going through monthly pillaging, famine and neglect because the owners of their villages and towns are more focused in getting more land and money than to worry about the people who are apparently under them. Thus the West is a very unpleasant place to be right now. Kurama explained. Naruto had started walking by the time the Kyuubi was finished. So why are we going there, you stupid fox? Naruto asked, rather annoyed. Because I believe that you will be able to stop this. What? Naruto actually stopped walking. Kyuubi sighed. I have seen your resolve to help people, Naruto. This is evident with how you acted in Wave, and your promise to the pink-haired howler monkey to rescue that Uchiha bastard. So I think you will be able to achieve what no other will. Kyuubi said. What's that? Naruto asked, walking again. Reform the Western Empire. One day later. It was another day for the banished Konoha ninja as he neared the furthest bird country border. He had encountered a few of their ninja patrols who questioned him, though let him continue when he explained he was just passing through. He was sitting down for some lunch that he caught in the form of a poor rabbit that was in the wrong place at the wrong time, when something caught his eye, a small glint in the tree. He was confused as to what it was before his instincts, born from the abuse the villagers gave him, screamed at him to dive out of the way. And so he did. Just in time for a kunai to merely scratch his side, which Kurama immediately began healing. "Who are you? Show yourself," Naruto shouted. And they did, in the form of two Konoha Jonin. Naruto sighed. "Let me guess, you're under council orders to come kill the demon," Naruto said sarcastically. His answer came in the form, Sweden. Gunshot, from the leftmost Jonin. Jumping out of the way of the water bullet, he was instantly set upon by the other ninja. Quickly taking out a kunai, he blocked a swipe, but he regretted doing so when his arm instantly buckled from the superior strength of the Jonin and was rewarded with quite a large gash down his chest. Biting his lip to stop his cry of pain, he leapt back from the exchange and tried to stop the blood. Which was weird. Kurama usually stopped the blood almost immediately after the wound was made. "Kurama, what's happening?" "No idea, Kit. Some sort of chemical is slowing the healing of your wounds. While I can bypass it somewhat, it has significantly reduced my ability to heal your injuries until I can purge it from your body," the fox explained. Well shit. Yup. It didn't take long for the Konoha nins to take advantage of his weakness and they pounced on him. Naruto tried jumping out of the way, but their speed was also clearly above his own. Evident of the now leg planted in his stomach, which launched him into a tree. Quickly getting up, he drew his tanto and parried a volley of shuriken heading in his direction and ducked a kunai thrust. He jabbed his tanto upwards towards the enemy Jonin, hoping to kill him or injure him at least, but it was swiftly blocked with another kunai. He jumped backwards away from another Sweden gunshot, and crossed his arms as a fist impacted them, causing him to crash to the ground. Seconds later, the other ninja landed on him with his knee in his chest, pinning him down. Looking to his left, he saw his tanto lying in the grass and tried reaching for it, but his efforts were for naught when the Jonin pinning him stabbed his arm to the ground with the kunai still in his grip. Naruto bit back another yelp of pain, instead glared heatedly at the Jonin as he poised to kill him. Kurama chakra would be useful, Naruto yelled as he managed to parry the strike so it only buried itself into his left shoulder. If I do that you might bleed out because I'll be giving you a full tail, he replied. If I don't get chakra I won't have the chance to bleed out. Fine, fine, your funeral, Kyuubi muttered. It will be. He shouted as the red malicious chakra encased his body. He hissed in pain as it burned his body, but took advantage of the now stunned Jonin above him by shoving him off and stabbing in the chest with the kunai from his shoulder. With one Jonin down, Naruto chose this time to escape now that he had the extra power from the Biju cloak, just as a handful of shuriken and kunai landed where he had once been standing. Naruto stopped and leant on nearby tree as he caught his breath. He had been running for hours now. The Biju cloak had worn off a while ago and he was running on his own steam trying to carry on, but he was at his end here. How we doing there, Fox? Naruto asked, breathing hard. His vision was swimming and black spots dotted the edge of his eyesight. My honest opinion, Kurama asked, slightly solemn. As opposed to what exactly? He said sarcastically. Fair enough, not particularly well. I've almost purged the poison from your body, but it's had repercussions. For example, you lost a lot of blood, which I'm sure you're feeling now. The chemical that was in your body might have had a lasting effect by limiting how much chakra I can use to heal you, so you can't heal cuts in a matter of minutes anymore. It would be closer to an hour before it seals, and it's more likely to leave a scar now, but I know how you feel about those. So if you don't find someone to heal your injuries, you might be in trouble. I'm doing the best I can in here, but I need help. What's this? The great Kyuubi-sama asking for help. He couldn't help but comment on. If you want to live, then yes. Kyuubi replied. That's reassuring, Naruto said before pushing himself off the tree. Right, let's keep moving. He had only taken a couple of steps before he finally collapsed. Well shit, he muttered as his eyes fluttered closed. The shouting from the back of his mind was growing quieter and quieter as he let his consciousness fade. He became faintly aware of rustling around him and he felt some pressure on his forehead be taken off before being replaced with a lot colder pressure. He felt his finger twitch on his left hand and pain shot up his arm like wildfire. He held back a wince so he didn't alert whoever was tending to him that his was awake, not knowing if they were friend or foe yet. Cautiously opening one of his eyes when he heard the rustling stop, he spotted a girl with their back turned to him. Looking around the room, he noticed it was very basic with wooden walls, a bed, and table near the door with all his ninja equipment and clothes on it. This was the table the girl appeared to be working on. Next to his bed was a smaller table with a lamp on it, as there were no windows in the room he was in. On this table was a small bowl with red water in it. A pair of scissors sat in the bowl covered in the red liquid which he guessed was his own blood. Next to the bowl were many towels and pieces of cloth, some blotched in red, others not, and a small reel of thread sat beside them. Looking down, he saw his chest and arms covered in a few bandages over his wounds, while others apparently hadn't been addressed yet. Turning slightly, he saw the girl still had her back to him and looked like she was crushing something. As silently as he could, he leant over and grabbed the scissors from the bowl, this time wincing as his wounds stretched, and hid it under the blanket he was covered with and closed his eye again, pretending to still be asleep. He waited a few moments before he the rustling again and soon felt something press against the large gash across his chest. Quick as his injuries allowed, he was up and pinning the girl to the bed he on with the scissors held at her neck, and he gazed into fearful viridian green eyes. "Who are you? Where am I?" Naruto asked, pressing his weapon in further to get his point across. I in the west. I found you passed out in the forest bleeding G, and I decided to help. The girl replied stuttering. My name is Injigo Saku and I'm 14. I live with my G grandparents because my parents died when I was young. I have a B-type blow. Naruto put a hand up to stop her. Why did you help me? Naruto said, continuing his interrogation. My mother before she died said to always help those in need. I saw you on the ground D and remembered what my mother said. The newly identified Injigo explained. So I made a sled DGE out of sticks and leaves and dragged back to my house where I began to heal you. Naruto narrowed his eyes and looked into her still scared gaze, although it looked as though it had dimmed a bit. She's telling the truth, Kit. Kurama interrupted. How do you know? I have the ability to sense negative emotions, and currently there are none directed at you. Naruto took Kyuubi's views into consideration and lifted the scissors of Injigo's throat and fell back against the head of the bed after she scrambled up and away from him. Naruto panted as the adrenaline from the moment wore off and moving in his injured state came back to bit him in the. He hissed in pain and screwed his eyes shut to try and block out the pain erupting from the top half of his body. He sat there for a little while concentrating on trying to dim the pain when he something gooey being put on his large wound on his chest. Opening his eyes slightly, he saw the girl putting a green paste on his gash. He lifted himself slightly trying to signal to her to back off, but she only glared at him and said, "If you want your injuries to stop hurting, keep still and let me work," she said sternly. Naruto, still on guard, narrowed his eyes slightly but did as she asked. Eventually the wound was dressed and bandaged and they were now sitting in the room with an awkward tension in the air. He took this time to observe the girl sitting in front of him. She had a soft round face, with a button nose, viridian eyes, and a small dainty mouth. Her hair was a deep shade of indigo that trailed down to the middle of her back. Her shapely form was perfectly emphasized by her narrow hips and her growing bust, a well-formed rear. From her sitting position Naruto could make out that she was taller than him. Naruto was a bit miffed at being reminded that he was a short stack. "Naruto," he said eventually. "What?" Injigo replied. "My name." Naruto answered. Naruto Uzumaki," he said, looking at less hostile. "And sorry about earlier. My ninja training rather dictated that I act quickly. Sorry if I scared you." Injigo's eyes lit up at the mention he was a ninja. "You're a ninja," she exclaimed, and when she received a confused nod promptly warped into his face with a 1000-watt smile akin to his own. "Really? We don't have many ninja here in the West because the scrolls to learn chakra are highly valued and kept secret, or they're mercenaries from the East, and I've never heard of them teach anyone before, let alone tell them about chakra," she practically shouted. "No ninjas, huh? What kind of soldiers are over here then?" Naruto asked, curious. "It's mainly untrained militia which earns a lot of unfortunate deaths because the lords don't train them. But there are some old samurai that are still loyal to their lords. Like my own grandfather," Injigo explained. As the tension eased they got to talk to each other, and while not quite friends yet they had defiantly repaired what had occurred earlier. It was a sleeping Naruto that Injigo left as they both turned in for the night. Naruto awoke to the sound of rustling once again. Groggily opening his eyes he noticed he was face to face with an elderly woman, maybe around the age of 70 but he couldn't be sure. She was standing hunched over him inspecting his bandages. Injigo was standing slightly behind her. He groaned slightly when she touched a particularly sensitive area on his chest. "Oh, you're awake?" she asked. Apparently, Naruto replied looking at the woman. You're healing surprisingly quickly. When Injigo said how close to dying you were, I am surprised that you should be up and walking within a few days. The elderly woman stated. That's good. I got things that I need to do. Naruto said, stretching a little, though winced when he did so. I'm sure you do. The woman replied, but you must still rest, so sleep some more. I will wake you around noon so you can eat. Thank you, Naruto said before settling down to sleep once again. This routine continued for about a week before Naruto was deemed well enough to move around, and by that time he was practically bouncing around with pent-up energy. Almost sensing his excitement, the old woman, whose name he later learned was Yuga, entered the room. All right, calm down Naruto. I can feel the vibrations in the other room, Yuga said as she chuckled. Said boy smiled sheepishly. Sorry, I'm not one to stay still for long. It's quite all right, dear. Here, let me check your wounds. You should be able to get up and leave today, she explained, moving over to the boy virtually vibrating in his bed. Good, I can finally get out of this damn room and train, Naruto all but shouted. He was quite sick of the room at this point, almost as much as the hospital back in Konoha. Yes, Naruto. We know, you haven't stopped complaining for the last couple of days. Naruto calmed down a bit and smiled sheepishly. Sorry, heh. He laughed awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. It was only a few minutes later that Naruto took his first steps out of his impromptu hospital room, this time taking a look around the house he had been taken to. At first glance it appeared to be in a small one with the room he was currently in, with only a small kitchen area in a corner and a table with 4 chairs. Shelves were dotted around holding various objects, but other than that only a few windows and doors were present. Like his room, the place was made up of mainly wood, and he guessed that 2 doors present led to other room which were most likely also wood. Sitting at the table eating was Injigo, who gave a polite little wave to Naruto before going back to her meal. Feeling his stomach rumble, he took a seat opposite he and sat down. I don't suppose you've got any more food to eat, he asked, smiling slightly. Of course, Injigo said while standing up to get some for Naruto. An hour later Naruto stepped out of the house, in a burnt orange button-up shirt and a pair of black shorts and blue sandals. Under his arm he carried the scrolls he acquired from his parents and Kurama. He looked around the area he was in and found that the house he had lived in for a week for sitting in a clearing in a forest. The trees were about the same size as the ones back in Fire Country, but their bark was a weird black. He wondered why the cottage, now behind him, was of normal color. Naruto let his eyes wander around and spotted a larger tree among others, which stood out and walked over to it. Looking back he noticed he was a fair distance away from the building, so he set his stuff and placed his hands on his hips. What should I start with? He pondered. Do the contract first, Kurama instructed. Why? He asked. Because of you running you haven't been able to summon the boss yet. He is most likely getting impatient, the fox explained. Okay, how much chakra should I use? Naruto asked as he concentrated. Use just a little more than you would for Gamabunta. Okay, Naruto mumbled as he went through a set of hand seals. Summoning jutsu, he exclaimed. An outburst of smoke signified the summoning's success. Naruto stumbled back slightly, both at the sudden depletion of chakra and the shock of the size of the cloud of smoke that appeared. It was easily a third of the size bigger than Bunta. A low, deep growl resonated from the epicenter of the smoke. It practically screamed power and respect. A large gust of wind started up suddenly, and blew away the remainder of the smoke. The first thing Naruto noticed was that the creature was truly a behemoth in size, easily comparable to the size of a biju, but it was also majestic. Yet it held a lithe form as it stretched its body. The dragon's wingspan was most likely the length of the Hokage monument. Its tail unfurled from around its body. It was covered in end to end in small barbs, the tip of the tail ending in the shape of a morning star about the size of his torso. Naruto quickly concluded he didn't want to meet with that. Traveling up, Naruto finally looked at the color of the dragon, whose scales were a rich jade. The only place this differed was its chest, where the scales were a shining silver. All across its body, scars were present, showing that it was still a battle-hardened summon. Great jade legs, flexed with muscles as they stood, like pillars they supported the body of which they were part of. Its claws were the size of his body and looked very sharp. In the end his eyes drifted up to the beast's head, only to freeze when his eyes locked with vibrant amethyst-colored eyes. Molten gold slits were present in the irises splitting them. The dragon has a narrow snout with the teeth poking out from the sides of its gums. Its head was covered in barbs much like its tail, with the exception of two larger horns which were flecked in black, crowning his head. "Ah, you must be the new summoner. I am surprised you called me on your first try. But we have more important matters to attend to. For example," the dragon spoke in a deep, daunting voice that held all the magnificence that its figure deserved, before it took a threatening step forward, shoving his snout into the boy's chest, making him fall onto his behind. "How did you sign this contract?" he roared, losing all the magnificence that he once held, changing in an instant to a fiery demon capable of leveling sights without so much as a second thought. Naruto shook with fear but soon swallowed it and stood up directly in front of the lizard's mouth and locked eyes with it once more, daring it to eat him. "Your dear friend Kyuubi gave it to me to sign," Naruto explained. "Oh, he did he?" The dragon spoke, stretching back up. "I'm curious though, why would he let weak little morsel like you sign the most powerful of the contracts?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or whatever a dragon has as an eyebrow anyway." Naruto spluttered at the jab to both his strength and his height, and he could have sworn he heard laughing at the back of his mind. "Weak," he yelled. "You come back down here, you lousy excuse of a salamander, so I can beat you back into the age of the Rikudo Senin." He challenged, shaking his fist up at the dragon, completely forgetting the fact that he was the same size as the fuzz ball stuck in his gut. Said being was now staring at Naruto with shock evident in its eyes before it burst out in rambunctious laughter. Its deep bellowing voice shook the ground it stood on. "I must say I didn't expect that response in the least, boy. You might just prove to be entertaining." "Very well, boy, I accept you as my clan's summoner," he announced, smirking at the gaping face on Naruto. What was all he managed. "You heard me, boy. Do not test my patience," the dragon growled, narrowing his eyes. Naruto immediately tried to placate the dragon. "Sorry, I was just shocked. Don't I have to pass some test or something?" he asked nervously. "Normally yes. However, when you locked eyes with me I looked into your past and judged your soul on its worthiness, and in all the millennia I have lived I have never seen a soul as pure as yours, despite the hardship you have faced. It was there that I decided you would be an honorable summoner," he explained a bit more calmly. Oh, well thanks I guess," Naruto said shyly, scratching the back of his head again. "Now I must return to my realm and inform the Dragon Council of the proceedings of today. I bid you a good day," he informed as he prepared to depart, and would have done so hadn't a call arose. "Wait," Naruto shouted. "I have two requests to ask before you go," he asked, bowing his head slightly as a show of respect. Very well, what is it?" the dragon asked, getting a little impatient. "First, I was wondering if you had any dragons specialized in information gathering, and if there are, could I ask for two?" he questioned. "Yes, there are particular dragons that excel in the art of espionage. I shall send two after I return." "And your second request? What is your name?" Naruto asked, smiling brightly. The dragon smiled slightly at that. "It is Zenino, but you may call me Zen-sama." And with that Zenino disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto waited a beat for the smoke to clear, before he released a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. "That was awesome," was shouted from his left, and Naruto quickly looked over. Standing side by side was Yuga, had a shocked look plastered across her face, and Injigo, who had a massive grin across hers with stars in her eyes. Naruto was confused why they were out there in the first place, and then realized that they weren't exactly being very quiet about their meeting. Naruto just laughed and smiled slightly. It was late evening now, and Naruto was still outside. Having organized and made a note of all the scrolls he had, he was now leaning up against the tree from earlier, looking over the Fuinjutsu book. To some people the book would look like a bunch of complicated jibber-jabber. But for Naruto, it just seemed to make sense. The words, descriptions and diagrams just leapt from the book into his head and stayed there. To him, the book was entrancing. His attention was soon directed elsewhere when two simultaneous pops sounded from in front of him. He looked up and noticed two small dragons sitting in front of him, looking up at him expectantly. They were obsidian black with shimmering scales that still glinted in the darkening light despite their color. The dragons were about waist height and had cobalt-colored eyes. Something that Naruto found a little peculiar was that the two dragons wore leather harnesses and steampunk goggles that only seemed to increase the size of their eyes. The harnesses had two large pouches attached to either side. Some scrolls and pieces of paper were hanging haphazardly out of it. "Are you the espionage dragons Zen-sama was sending?" he asked, looking at the two curiously, both of whom nodded their heads enthusiastically. "Okay, that's good. I have two very important missions for you," he explained, looking at the dragons. "One, you will go to Konohagakure no Sato. I want you to spy on the village and their movements, but I mainly want you to focus on the group called Konoha 12, or I guess 11 now, anyway. Want to know how they feel about me. No doubt the council probably told everyone about Kurama because I'm not there anymore." He sighed wistfully. The first dragon nodded and disappeared in another pop. Naruto turned to the other. "And for you, I want to gather information on the West here, anything you can really." The second dragon nodded but instead chose to fly off. Naruto sat watching as it did before going back to his book with a small grin present on his face. 1 month had passed since Naruto sent the dragons off, and he was currently going through the katas of the hummingbird, and he was doing well if he said so himself. He was still a beginner, but it was better than he used to be at least. At the moment he had roughly 500 clones doing various jobs around the clearing. 300 were going through the jutsu scrolls, learning all that they could before their short life ended. Another 100 were doing various chakra control exercises to try and improve his current abysmal control. The final 100 were split in two. One half were playing shogi, trying to increase his prowess in strategy. The other were reading books on the history of the West and the geography of it. Despite not liking to read, he had to admit, the history was quite interesting. His attention was pulled away from his katas when two pops signaled the entrance of a summon, making him turn his attention towards them. Seeing the two dragons had returned, Naruto started dismissing the clones in the clearing until there were none left, giving him a slight headache. Naruto turned and sat down with his back against the tree and watched the two dragons amble over to him. "All right, what have you got for me?" he asked. The dragons sat and rummaged through their pouches and pulled out a stack of papers and a scroll each and placed it in front of him. "Thank you. Is that all?" Both dragons nodded, bowed and disappeared in a pop of smoke back to their realm. He looked at both sets of reports with a calculating gaze before reaching over and grabbing the stack about the West. Reading through them, he gained knowledge about this side of the continent. There was 152 different provinces in the West, each and every one having a corrupt warlord ruling over it. The province he was currently in was called Aratana Hajimari. War plagued the West, causing thousands of deaths each year and causing suffering on an unimaginable scale. Yet no one was doing anything about it. That was what got to him. All of this and no one was doing anything to stop it. Feeling his anger rising, he set the reports down on the ground next to him, deciding to go over them in more detail later. Turning, he stretched to reach the ones about Konoha but froze before he could grab them. He was afraid of what he would read. Reminding himself that these were his friends, he hoped that they stuck to his side. Steeling himself, he grabbed the notes and began to read. Half an hour later, Naruto slid down the tree, landing on his Kyuubi's chakra receding back into him. His eyes remained unfocused as the crunching of tree bark became apparent when a tree behind him collapsed, adding to the now rather large newly formed clearing behind him which had been formed in his rage. He couldn't believe it. He refused to. But he couldn't deny it. The evidence was in front of him. His so-called friends had abandoned him, turning their back on him when he needed them the most. All but Shikamaru and Shino all but hated him. But they kept it hidden for obvious reasons. Even Hinata, with her crush the size of the elemental nations turning against him, having been brainwashed by the clan into believing it was his demonic powers that gave her crush on him. Yes, he knew about her crush. Who didn't? He didn't act on it due to the repercussions it would have on her. He was disgusted with them. But the best part was, Sasuke left again. Anbu were sent after him this time, but none ever returned. Presumed Kia. To him it was hilarious. Banished, the only person that brought him back, only for him to leave immediately after. Naruto let a sigh escape as he reined in his chaotic emotions, hoping to prevent another tantrum, as Kurama described it. Naruto. A meek voice sounded from his left, making him turn towards it. Standing just outside the danger zone were a scared Injigo and Yuga were standing looking at him nervously. He let another sigh escape. Sorry you had to see that. He apologized. You looked angry. What's wrong? Injigo asked, gaining a little confidence. Naruto closed his eyes and contemplated telling them. Kurama, he asked. Don't ask me, this is your choice. In my opinion you may as well tell them. It's not like things could get worse, right? He said before falling silent. Naruto nodded his head, agreeing with the fox. So for the next couple of hours Naruto told them everything, from Kyuubi being sealed inside his gut to the banishment note long ago. By the time he was finished the sun was setting and it was starting to get a little cold outside. And now we're here, he finished. The two were silent for a beat and Naruto cast his gaze down, believing they were starting to hate him. As if reading his thoughts, Injigo stood and walked over to him. Naruto looked up, expecting to be hit, but was unprepared for her crouching down beside him and hugging him. Naruto sat in shock for a moment before wrapping his arms around her hesitantly. Injigo, feeling this, hugged him tighter. You're not a demon, Naruto. In the month we have known you, you have done nothing to make us believe as such. She reassured him before breaking of the hug. Both while not realizing it, they missed each other's heat. Naruto's eyes widened and he looked towards Yuga, who smiled in response and nodded. Naruto's eyes turned down once more, before looking up again, this time with tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said, leaning into the embrace of Injigo, who had moved to comfort him at the sight of tears. Once he cleared up, he popped a question. I don't suppose I could stay here longer, could I? I got plans to make. Clones to train. Jutsu to learn. You understand, right? He asked, smiling. Yuga smiled warmly. Of course you can stay. We haven't kicked you out yet, have we? She answered. Laughter filled the air and the start of a great legend was firmly in place in the world. It had been 11 more months since he had arrived in Yuga and Injigo's house, making it a total of a year since he had been banished. And in truth, he couldn't be happier. He came to a realization after his little tantrum, that the leaf was merely holding him back. He had learned more in an hour of reading a scroll than an entire year at the academy. Though, he had the shadow clone to help with that, but, Details. During the beginning months he made sure that the basics we mastered to AT, while also improving on his chakra control and working on his taijutsu. After those few months he expanded his jutsu repertoire to more than just 3, as overpowered the Rasengan and Shadow clones were. It was rather boring to keep using those. So after finding some chakra paper stashed away in an scroll explaining the elemental affinities, Kurama instructed him to feed a little chakra into the slip to see what his affinity was. The result was rather surprising. Kurama, what does this mean? Naruto asked the resident fox in his gut. The reason for this question was being held in his hand. It was a slip of chakra paper, however it was the results of the test that stumped him. You kid, are going to be one hell of a shinobi, Kurama said, slightly stunned. The chakra slip had split down the middle with the edges so sharp it gave him a paper cut. One side it was crinkled up into a ball the size of his thumbnail. The other was so wet the paper was see-through and practically falling apart in his hand. Lastly, the thing that really confused his was the edges of the paper were charred with golden flames. Okay, the wind was my father's and water was mother's, but lightning and the golden fire? He questioned. Well, the lightning is your father's as well. Kurama explained. How so? Flying thunder god. Good point. And the fire? That'd be my fault. As you properly know, I'm the lord of demons, being the Kyuubi. I have access to the flames of demons, much like the Nibi who uses the flames of hell. However, unlike her, mine are more powerful, being golden instead of blue. Being my Jinchuriki, did I spell that correctly? This ability has passed to you. Anything else you passed to me? Possibly my ability to detect negative emotions, but we might have to work on that because it clearly wasn't working a month ago. He guessed. So I have 4 affinities. Naruto confirmed. Yup. Naruto chuckled. Sweet. He said aloud this time, while grinning like a loon. And thus Naruto began his journey through elemental jutsu, beginning with wind as it was his most powerful element. During the night, however, Kurama would tutor him in the jutsu he created for Naruto using the demonic flames while he slept in his mindscape. After Kurama told him anything he learnt in there he would know in reality. I mean, he was in his own mind after all. In regards to seals, there are 10 levels. Level 1 is a beginner and 10 being a master. Naruto, being who he is, flew through the first 3 levels as if they didn't exist, and was already halfway through level 4. He put it down to having the blood of 2 seals masters in him. He hadn't begun on the Hiraishin yet, as his father told him to wait until at least level 8, as that was when the space-time ninjutsu was covered in more detail than the earlier levels. Taijutsu was coming swiftly along and he was becoming better and better as time went on. He was by no means a master because he lacked the experience. He could most likely take most shunins in a one-on-one situation. Kenjutsu was a little hard due to his lack of a second blade, which was lost during his fight with the Jonin, because it turns out that the Uzumaki clan's style revolved around using 2 blades. The Sandai must have thought ahead when he got Naruto the Tonto to incorporate it into the style when he was told his heritage, so in its stead he used a stick, but it wasn't very effective, thus the problem. Around the 6th month Naruto began collaborating with his dragon summons to work with them better on the battlefield. He learned that there were multiple species of dragons which are more capable of using a specific element or area of expertise, for example the espionage dragons he summoned earlier. As such, he worked with everyone so he could figure out the best collaboration jutsu that they could. It was a very fruitful few months. The last months were focused on the more theoretical things such as battle strategies and jutsu theory, while he worked with Kurama at night in the ways of politics and diplomacy, all the while keeping up with the practical side of things. Now at the end of the 11 months, now 14, had a nice growth spurt, and being a high chunin, low jonin level ninja, Naruto was ready to take on the world. It was noon on the anniversary of his banishment, and Naruto was out in the clearing taking anger out on a few trees. The tree never knew what hit em, poor things. Fuden. Daitapa no Jutsu, was yelled before a small group of trees imploded due to the strength of the wind. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu, a golden flaming ball hit another group of trees. Sweden. Suiryuden no Jutsu. Raiden. Boruto no Jutsu. And what do you know, more dead trees. This was the scene that Injigo walked out to, a new clearing near their house complete with a lake to top it off, and a half-boy lying on the charred grass in the middle of it, apparently. During the 11 months he had grown increasingly close to both Yuga and Injigo, Yuga becoming a surrogate grandmother and Injigo becoming his closest friend, not that he had many at this point, and secret crush. He even began tutoring her in the ways of a ninja when she gained an interest in learning the basics to defend herself. "You done?" she asked, leaning over him. When she received a grunt she continued, "Where's your shirt?" She examined, suppressing a blush at his rather toned chest. Naruto, now a little more relaxed, lifted his head up to confirm it was missing, and when he noticed it was, shrugged. "No idea. Might have set it on fire by accident during, training." "Yes, training," he suggested. Injigo raised an eyebrow at the face Naruto was pulling and made a sound that clearly suggested she didn't believe him in the slightest. "I'll believe that when I'm 50. She mumbled, though Naruto still heard it and winced slightly. Naruto sighed and sat up, patting the space beside him. Injigo, taking the offered spot, sat beside him and looked at him with a gaze that said, "Tell me or no ramen for a month." Naruto, unnerved by the look, quickly proceeded into explaining, "Today is the anniversary of my banishment from Konoha. So I decided to release stress in training," he explained, his posture and tone clearly downtrodden. "Why do you miss the place that cursed your very existence, a place that made it their personal goal in life to try and kill you each year?" Injigo asked, clearly confused. Naruto sighed again, "Because despite all that, there were a precious few that liked me for who I'm. Not hate me for what I carry. It's them that I miss, not the village itself." He progressed, sighing wistfully. "Well, don't worry about them. As much as I hate to say it, you're here, they're not. There's nothing you can do to change that. You can't go back without the threat of death, and I doubt they would come here and abandon everything they have there." Injigo spoke softly, leaning onto Naruto somewhat to show her support. Naruto smiled slightly, and wrapped his arms around her in thanks. Yuga found them a little while later when she came to investigate, while Injigo hadn't returned earlier, lying on the grass, with Injigo's head resting on Naruto's chest while he had his arms wrapped protectively around her. Line break. A week later they were on their way to the province's capital, Fujiwara. The current warlord had fallen in battle, so as per tradition they were holding a tournament to decide a new one. The winner of the tournament would be inducted as their leader. The group was going there at the behest of Injigo's grandfather to watch the event. Although competing might be just as fun, shaking that thought out of his head, Naruto continued walking forward. "How much further do we have to walk?" Naruto whined as they ambled up a hill. He had read scrolls at the beginning of the journey to pass time, but that was boring now. Injigo was practicing the leaf spinning exercise, and Yuga, she was old, they don't seem to do much anyway. "We're almost there. You should be able to see it soon," Yuga said, ignoring Naruto's tone. A few moments later her words rang true as the paths they were walking along reached the top of the hill. In the lowlands before them was a small settlement. While not the size of any of the major villages back in the N, it was still fairly bigger compared to others like Wave and Taki. The village was surrounded by a wooden palisade that looked derelict and unkempt. The gate, although most likely has seen better days, was a better condition than the walls itself. The buildings itself were rather bland and generic. Wooden supports and a stone structure made up the base of the buildings, but even from their position on the hill he could see even they were neglected and falling apart. The most notable buildings was a long flat building near the entrance of the village, possibly a barracks of sorts, and a large traditional house in the center, an administration building most likely. A frown marred his face as he gazed at the village, realizing that fixing the West might be harder than he originally thought. Not that he thought it was going to be easy in the first place, but he likes a challenge. It was only 10 minutes before they finally entered Fujiwara. Using his recently upgraded observational skills, courtesy of Mr. Fox, he noticed that the information regarding the West's military was pretty accurate. Many old samurai patrolled the streets, their armor a little worse for wear but their swords were not, showing the warriors' care for their weapons. Many carried katanas and wakizashis. There were a few with odachis and nagiatas among others. Despite their age, Naruto didn't dare question their fighting prowess due to their time among the living, because with age comes experience. Hiruzen Sarutobi was a prime example of this. The militia, however, was a different story altogether. Few that he saw had armor, and even then it was patchy at best. Their weapons were varied and rather pathetic: hammers, shovels, pitchforks, and he even saw a butcher's knife. The capable weapons they did have were swords and the odd spear, though they were both rusty and dull with neglect. Though the militia vastly outnumbered the samurai, they were more cannon fodder than soldiers. People lined the streets, old and young. A lot were in rags and malnourished, reminding him of his early childhood. He had to stop multiple times to hand his emergency rations to children begging for food or money. He knew how to hunt, so it didn't matter if he handed them out. The West had its own experienced warriors, as every other nation does, but they were few and far between, though if he hazarded a guess he would think many were here today to fight in the tournament to earn the right to be a warlord. They wandered round the village some before meeting up with Injigo's grandfather, Kamuto, at a small cafe near the main building of the settlement. After introductions were completed between the two, they sat down and drank, deciding that the meager food that the cafe did have, other people could eat. "So you're from the East?" Kamuto questioned, taking a sip of some jasmine tea. "Yep. Fire country to be specific," Naruto answered, indulging in some sake himself. "Then why are you here?" he asked, curious. Naruto paused for a moment, looking at the man sitting opposite him. "Banished," he said simply. "Why here though?" "It's away from everything back in the EN. Hardly any ninja, if any, come here, so I have little chance of being discovered. Makes being here all the more pleasant and relaxing," he lied. Kamuto was silent for a tick before nodding. Moments later he looked at the sky to determine the position of the sun. "The tournament starts at noon. We should probably get moving," he stated, rising to his feet, the others following his example. "Hang on, I'll be right back. I'm just going to go to the toilet," Naruto said as he walked into the cafe, moments later returning so they the company to move to the small area made outside of the city for the day. They never noticed a man covered in a cloak exiting the same cafe and walking in the opposite direction as the group. Naruto and company were sitting in the bleachers of the area that had been set up for the occasion. They were sat near the top of the seats, giving them a good view of the fights below. The area itself was just a square marked out in the ground, which was bordered by a wooden picket fence but was about as large as the arena back in Konoha, maybe larger. There was one opening was present at either side of the area, clearly where the fighters enter. "Who fights in these tournaments?" Naruto asked. "Anyone and everyone," Injigo answered. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that. "It's true. This is a sure way to go from to bottom to the top, and all they have to do is win a tournament. You can get simple militia looking for a better way of life, or samurai. Even the occasional ninja mercenary appears. We won't know till they start fighting," Kamuto explained. Naruto nodded in understanding and turned his attention back to the field as a man, in what looked like a very expensive kimono, walked onto the field and called attention to himself. He waited for a few moments as the noise slowly dwindled down into nothing. "Hello everyone and welcome to the Lord's Tournament," he shouted, pausing when the crowds let up a cheer. As some of you may know, this tournament is held every time a warlord dies to decide on a new one. And have we got a line up for you today? The crowd cheered again. For you that don't know how this works, at the beginning there is a free-for-all fight until only 8 are left standing. Then those 8 choose a number and are separated into pairs to fight. The winner then fights another winner until there is only one left standing. As per the rules, killing is only allowed during the free-for-all and is prohibited during the quarters and onwards. Other than that, everything else goes. He explained. The crowd roared and stamped their feet, creating a deafening amount of sound. The man rose a hand to quieten the crowd once more. Now that's out of the way, bring on the fighters. He exclaimed, throwing both hands in the air, and he practically ran to the edge of the field, and roughly 100 men, and some women, flooded through the 2 gaps in the fence to mingle around the area. The man, now the assumed mediator, was standing at one of the side of the arena looking at the people inside. Right, you know the rules, so as soon as I drop my hand you can begin. Ready. He received various forms of confirmation. Okay. 3, 2, 1, Hajime. He dropped his hand and pandemonium ensued. Half an hour later and 8 people were left standing. The floor was littered with bodies, both unconscious and dead. The 8 survivors were standing in a line in front of the moderator, all of them of varying stature and look. Many of them had blood on their bodies, both theirs and others, giving them a slightly ominous look. The mediator, who shall now be called Dave because I'm tired of calling him either man or the mediator, also I can't be asked to make up a Japanese-sounding name, gathered the 8 contenders and told them to stand in a line. An assistant, also in an expensive-looking kimono, walked up to Dave and handed him a small wooden box as men and women in the background began to remove the bodies from the arena to clear it for the coming duels. In this box are 8 numbers. You shall each choose a number and you will be paired accordingly. Dave began, addressing the fighters in front of him. However, you shall tell no one your number so that you won't know who you will be facing. Before a fight begins we will call 2 numbers. You will enter at opposite sides of the area and bow when to meet in the center. We will then begin the fight. Is everything clear? He explained and asked. The people in front of him nodded. Dave held out the box towards the group, who looked to each other before a few shrugged and walked towards it, the rest following their lead. You all have your numbers. He received nods. Good, we will take an hour break to let to rest and possibly resupply you weapons, then we'll begin. He finished and walked off, the competitors doing the same and many people in the audience mimicking their actions. Naruto stood up and stretched slightly to remove the kinks in his body and sighed in relief. Right, I'm going to the toilet and a snack. You guys want anything? He asked of the group who had stayed sitting. He received no's and left for the public toilets. As he walked down from the stands and headed in the direction of the toilets, he spotted the cloaked fighter wandering towards him. Digging his hand into his pocket, he pulled out a scroll and handed it to the figure as they passed each other, both continuing as if they hadn't done so in the first place. The man in question opened the scroll as he walked and looked at the seals on it along with paragraphs of information. He pressed on of the seals and in a small poof of smoke a bunch of paper bombs appeared in his hand. In another poof of smoke they returned. Opening the scroll slightly more to look at the paragraphs of information, each paragraph was dedicated to one of the fighters that had survived until the final stages. The man let loose a small chuckle and closed the scroll, placing it in his pocket, and proceeded to walk back around the area to wait for the hour to finish. Naruto sat back down beside Injigo with a grunt and began feasting on a bag of popcorn he had bought. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Injigo looking at the bag longingly, and he silently moved the bag slightly further away from her. He smirked slightly when he saw her pout in disappointment. Down on the field Dave checked his watch and nodded to himself. Clearing his throat he called attention to himself and the crowd quieted down until there was only a little murmuring amongst them. Hello and welcome back to the final stages of the tournament. he announced, drawing a roar from the crowd. As you know, we are going to call 2 numbers from the 8 selected and the pair will face off. The winner will move to the next round. He received more cheers and shouts. Now numbers 2 and 5 please step into the arena. He instructed. The crowd clapped and shouted as the cloaked man stepped in from one end, and a man wearing dark blue samurai-type armor, just without the helmet and shoulder guards. At his waist was a katana and wakizashi combo. Both walked to the center of the arena and bowed at the waist to each other once they were around 10 feet apart. Dave looked at both competitors and asked, "Are you both ready?" He received one nod and a grunt. "Then Hajime," he yelled, and the samurai immediately drew his katana and blocked a strike from the cloaked man. His eyes widened slightly from the speed of which he was attacked. Grabbing his wakizashi, he continually blocked, parried and dodged the strikes from the cloaked man. He blocked the katana with his own and raised his wakizashi to strike at his side, but in a flash a kunai held it in place. They held a moment, trying to overcome each other with pure strength, before the cloaked man lashed out a kick which connected with the samurai's stomach, making him hunch over as his breath lost him, only to receive a knee in the face that he couldn't parry in time. Blood and spittle flew as his head blew back from the impact. He shook his head slightly to relieve some of the fogginess that had gathered. Standing straight, he moved ready to engage the cloaked fighter once more before noticing something wrong. He was no longer standing in front of him. Before he could question it further, he felt a point at the base of his spine and a blade at his throat. Inevitably he stilled immediately. "Yield," was whispered in his ear. The samurai gulped slightly before sighing and dropping both his weapons and announced, "I yield." As he did so, the crowd cheered, clapped and stamped their feet as Dave announced the winner of the fight. "I'm not gonna bother writing the other fights cause I'm lazy. The quarter-finals having passed, the fights more interesting than the last. Soon the semi-finals were upon them. Dave once again announced 2 numbers who had won the previous battles. Once that battle had finished, he called 2 more. This time our amazing cloaked figure walked in one end, and he entered a rather small woman dressed in a dark green Chinese-styled battle kimono with sakura flowers decorating it. She didn't appear to have weapons on her, but looks can be deceiving. The lady had striking gray eyes, and black hair tied in 2 buns, not unlike Tenten. Again both opponents met in the center and bowed to each other before stepping back slightly. The call for the beginning of the match came and passed, and neither competitor moved from their spots, choosing to analyze their opponents first. Finally they moved. First was the cloaked figure, now named Alan, because I'm tired of repeating the same thing again, flinging a few kunai towards the lady, who reached into her sleeves and extracted 2 fans to redirect the kunai to the ground. Alan raised an eyebrow. "Not that anyone could see it, fans?" he asked in a deep gravelly voice. The woman didn't reply and instead flapped her fans in the direction of Alan, having seen something similar before, leapt out of the way just as 2 blades of wind struck the ground where his was standing previously. This process continued on for a little while, with Chinese-styled ladies shooting wind blades, and Alan dodging them. Alan, getting bored of dodging all the time, went on the offensive, grabbing a handful of shuriken from inside his cloak before hurling them at his opponent before going through a set of hand signs. Fuden. Repusho. A gust of wind was shot towards the shuriken and encompassed them, making them travel faster towards their intended target. Said person widened their eyes and jumped to the side to avoid the projectiles, but Alan was already there waiting for her. Sword drawn, he took a swing at her, but his attempt was blocked by one of her fans. They were rather resilient, he noted. Snapping a kick off, it connected with her side, launching her to one side, but she recovered quickly, turning her short venture with flight into a flip, landing her feet. Alan came at her and they shared a bout in taijutsu, the woman with her fans and Alan with 2 kunai he procured. They danced around the arena, trading blows back and forth, both acquiring small cuts and bruises as they did so. It was some time before either landed a significant hit, but it was Alan we did, cutting his opponent across the chest after he had broken through her guard. Slightly stunned, the woman was slow to react, but that was all that was needed as Alan buried his fist into her solar plexus, snapping her pretty much in half. As she fell to the ground heaving for breath, she felt a foot plant itself in her lower back and then point of the kunai pressed into her neck. "Yield," he commanded sternly. She coughed slightly before answering. "I yield," she exclaimed, looking in the direction of Dave, who nodded his head and announced the winner to the crowd, who once again cheered for the fantastic fight. "Again, I'll just skip the other fight. Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we have witnessed some amazing talent today. But now we have the fight we've all been waiting for." The crowd cheered and clapped, many having placed bets on the two to make it to the finals or win. The two fighters were already standing in the arena ready to fight. Of course, Alan was standing one end, and the other was a particularly large man, nicknamed Mountain. He easily reached 7 feet and his body was packed with hard muscles. He had no shirt on, displaying his chest, an 8-pack and a pattern of scars. He had bandages covering his hands and forearms. He had gray baggy trousers on and get on his feet. All in all, he was rather intimidating to the viewers, and many had their bets on him to win. Alan stood fearlessly in front of the man, staring into the man's eyes from beneath his hood, never wavering in the slightest. The mountain of a man sneered slightly at that, believing that Alan thought he was underestimating him, and inwardly grinned. His arrogance would be his downfall. Dave signaled for the start of the match, and the mountain sprang forward with agility that one wouldn't expect from him. The ground cracked from where he launched himself, and he appeared in front of Alan in a blur. Said man barely had time to blink before he was forced to dodge a strike that would make Tsunade impressed. Mountain growled, not expecting to have missed, and pushed off to strike for a second time. This progressed for a while. Mountain swung and missed, and Alan dodged. Mountain was getting increasingly frustrated as his opponent kept moving out of the way, not attacking in any way. After a few more minutes of this carrying on, a mistake was finally made. The mountain overextended on one of his swings. Due to his frustration, Alan capitalized on it instantly. Seeing that he swung his right fist, he parried with his left, opening his body for punishment. The first thing he did was break the elbow of the offending arm. Next, he clapped his hands over his ears to confuse him, break his nose, a few ribs, and then drop-kicked him straight in the chest to crush the ribs that were not as of yet broken, launching him several feet back the way he came. All within the space of 3 seconds, the arena was unsurprisingly silent at the swift defeat of the most favored to win the tournament. It wasn't before long that the arena erupted in cheers and shouts. The crowd clapped and stomped their feet. Medics rushed onto the field to take a look at Mountain and proceeded to take him away to effectively treat him. Meanwhile, Dave had made his way over to the middle of the arena where Alan was currently standing, who, while his breathing was a little heavy, he was pretty much untouched by the entire thing. Dave called attention to himself by raising his arms in the air, and slowly the noise died down until there was barely murmuring at all, which was impressive considering the arena had nearly 2,000 spectators. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a tournament we've had today," he yelled, raising the noise level back up. He waited till it died down again before continuing. "Beside me stands our only undefeated champion of the day, and thus our new warlord." The crowd roared again, this time with much more enthusiasm. Up in the stands, Naruto had finished his popcorn and was playing with the empty bag with nervousness. When Dave asked for Alan to reveal himself, he leant over to Injigo and whispered in her ear, "I'm sorry." A confused look crossed her face for a moment, but when the Naruto next to her disappeared in a plume of smoke, she understood perfectly and turned back towards the arena just as Naruto, "If you hadn't figured it out by now, you should feel ashamed of yourselves." Dropped the cloak covering himself. He hadn't changed much appearance-wise, that hasn't already been said, other than a light stubble along his jaw. He wore gray Anbu-style trousers with bandages wrapped around his thighs which held his kunai pouch. Black sandals adorned his feet and an orange battle kimono covered his chest along with a black sash wrapped around his waist which also held a bigger pouch on the back of his hip. More bandages covered his hands and up his forearms much like mountain, however these were black instead. Having no forehead protector to hold up his hair, it lay limp on his head, covering his eyes slightly as it swayed in the light breeze. The crowd was silent for a beat as Naruto introduced himself. My name Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, formerly of the Fire and Leaf. He said, bowing slightly before straightening again. The crowd was silent for another beat before bursting into cheers and shouts once again. You'd think that's all they did. Naruto leant back into the rather comfy chair he decided. After the tournament concluded he was shown his office in the building he originally guessed was the administration building, proving him right. The office was in the back of the building on the second floor with windows facing away from the main gate onto rolling hills with the forest bordering it. The room was rather extravagant, something he already loathed. The tables and chairs looked expensive and priceless tapestries lined the walls. A bookcase stood vigil in one corner. It was dotted with a few old-looking books and scrolls. He would have to do something about this place, he thought. A knock on the door drew him out of his thoughts. Enter, he said. An old man with a cane answered the command, walking with pride despite his apparent age. He was bald, and wore glasses that covered his gray eyes. Black stubble around his mouth was the only hair that appeared to inhabit his head. He was hunched slightly and seemed to be leaning heavily on his cane. He wore a black kimono with a white sash and sandals on his feet. He stopped before Naruto's currently empty desk and bowed low. My name is Guro and I am your main advisor. He spoke. Main? Naruto asked. The newly introduced Guro nodded. Yes, while you have others, you will be seeing me considerably more than others as they answer to me more often than not. He explained. Naruto nodded. I'm guessing you're here for a reason other than introducing yourself. He said with a raised eyebrow. Although, I'm sure you will decline, there are a large amount of matters for you to attend that have not been for some time. Guro sighed as he took out a stack of papers from his kimono and placed them in front of Naruto upon the desk, who leant forward and picked up the topmost paper to inspect. After looking for a while, Naruto placed the paper back down on the stack. Guro visibly sagged when he saw this, thinking he was ignoring the problem. Why would you think I would decline to look at this? This is my province now and I will do everything to look after it. Naruto looked at Guro curiously. Said man's eyes widened comically, and his non-existent eyebrows rose into his non-existent hairline. What? I came here to make a difference, Guro, not to make things worse. Naruto said as he smiled slightly. Guro relaxed and slumped in relief. He smiled gratefully. I had almost lost hope there were good leaders out there as this world. He bowed again. Thank you, my lord. He said. Naruto sighed. If we're going to be working closely together, then please call me Naruto. I'm not one for formalities. He offered. Guro smiled again. Very well, Naruto. Naruto gestured for Guro to take a seat in one of the two placed in front of his desk. Speaking of working closely, I'm not very well versed in the ways of politics or diplomacy. I came rather unprepared for this. He admitted meekly. I hope you can teach me as we work to fix the mess this province is in. He smiled and held his hand out for Guro to shake. Guro took the hand graciously and nodded. Of course, my lord. Naruto rolled his eyes at that. I would be happy to. They worked for around an hour looking over at what was most important to deal with first and what wasn't as much when another knock came at the door, interrupting their conversation on how to deal with the lack of food being produced. Naruto looked at the door with curiosity, and looked at Guro, who shrugged. Come in, he commanded. When the door opened, he was rather surprised to see Ichigo and Yuga walk through, with Kamuto bringing up the rear and closing the door behind them. Naruto looked at them for a moment before turning to Guro. Do you mind if you excuse us? he asked. Goro nodded and left silently, locking the door behind him so no one would disturb them. I suppose you want an explanation, Naruto asked. His guests nodded mutely. You both know how I grew up, right? He said, looking pointedly at Injigo and Yuga. Both nodded again. When I was banished I was wondering on where I could go. Kyuubi then told me about this place and how bad off it was. He then told me about the Western Empire and how he believed that I could be the one to rejoin all of the warring states within. So when you said we were going to a tournament to decide it on a new warlord, I jumped at the chance, and now we're here. He explained, leaning back into his seat. His audience was quiet as they contemplated his words. You seem like a good kid, and my family seems to like you, so I'll trust you on this. Kamuto said eventually. Naruto smiled and nodded before turning his attention to the two females in the room. I will as well. In the short time I have known you, you have proved to be a very bright individual, and if anyone can accomplish what you are attempting, then it will be you. Yuga agreed, smiling softly at the boy. Then they all turning to look Injigo, who had a look of confusion, anger, surprise and a smile all in one, making her look rather constipated. She turned her head slightly to look at her grandparents and gestured towards the door. Thankfully they took the hit and left. Naruto was confused as to what she wanted and watched her walk around the desk towards him. Though he was rather unprepared for the slap that impacted his face, and the follow-up, and the one after that, but Naruto caught the fourth one. Okay, I probably deserved that, Naruto admitted, though what he was truly unprepared for was the sudden grappling of his shirt and being yanked forward towards her face. Naruto blinked, and blinked again. The reason for this confusion was the fact that Injigo had pulled him forwards into a rather sloppy kiss. Naruto blushed a color that would put Hinata to shame, before finally closing his eyes and giving into his instincts, slowing, wrapping his arms around her waist as she mirrored his movements around his neck as they shared their first, although inexperienced, kiss. Cough. Naruto's second cough. After a few moments they finally separated to breath and basked in the aftertaste. Not that I'm complaining, but what was that for? Naruto asked, dense as ever. That was for being the caring and loving boy that I fell in love with despite only knowing him a year. Injigo answered, looking into Naruto's eyes as they widened. Naruto's mouth opened and closed but no sound came out, before he finally acted, crashing his lips onto hers again without warning as they both engaged in their second kiss. When they separated again, tears gathered in Naruto's eyes. Thank you, he said. Injigo smiled understandingly and hugged him tight, both of them silent as they held each other close. Next time you do something like that again, tell me, all right? Injigo said softly. All right, Naruto replied. Tsunade sighed and rubbed her temples for what seemed the 100th time this meeting alone. In her opinion it was too early for their shit. The counselors were arguing as per usual about their rather dire circumstances. She tuned them out and began reflecting where it all went wrong. It turned out that banishing Naruto was the worst things that had happened to the village since the Kyuubi attacked years ago. And boy did Karma have a field day. A year after the boy was banished, the word had by then reached the ears of everyone and their grandmother in the EN. The first to react was Wave when they cancelled their trade agreement with Fire Country and Konoha, and also declaring that if any Konoha nin were discovered in their lands there would be dire consequences. After that, any country that Naruto had an impact on followed suit, completely abandoning Konoha and any of her allies. Spring Country stopped giving them their more advanced technology, Taki cut their alliance, among a few. The final nail in the proverbial coffin, if you will, was when Gura was named the 5th Kage of Suna. His first act as Kage was to literally rip apart the alliance they held, in front of the council no less, until it was just the agreement that should one village be attacked the other would aid them, due to the fact that Iowa was still a definite issue to Wind County as a whole. So the end result was in a few short months Konoha stood alone with only an ally that literally hated them in the EN. However, their issues didn't stop there, not by a long shot. Eventually, due to the fact that pretty much all their trade agreements had been absolved, they quickly fell into economic decline, much like Suna had. Though they were beginning to recover, it also didn't help that many nations stopped sending missions to them, creating a lack of jobs for the ninja to perform, thus not bringing in more income. Things continued to get worse when the Fire Daimyo cut much of their funding due to Konoha having caused a lot of problems for him as well as themselves. Problems continued on throughout the years as Konoha struggled to stay as the strongest of the hidden villages, but that all changed when Oto rallied both Kumo and Iwa through their mutual hatred of the tree huggers and created an alliance between the three nations to destroy Konoha and Fire Country as a whole. Many smaller nations jumped at the chance of a go at Konoha, many also hating them, while others just wanted the glory of destroying one of the 5 feet large nations. Somehow along the road they managed to include Kiri in on this mess, inviting them at a chance to get back at them for whatever reason. Thus the alliance was created for the sole reason of destroying Konoha. While having no real name, it had been nicknamed AKC, Anti-Konoha Coalition, by the ninjas of Konoha themselves. Suna was unluckily in that aspect, due to the fact part of their agreement was still in effect. They were dragged into the conflict that they seriously wanted no part of, some even wanted to join in on the fun. And so the Fourth Shinobi World War had begun. 3 years had passed since that point, and Konoha reaffirmed their place at the top by constantly repelling the attacks on their land by their enemies along with the Suna Nin, although this was at a great cost. They started the war with near 20,000 ninjas in active service and 15,000 in reserve should the need arise. In this case they did. Once the declaration of war was official and confirmed, all reserve ninja were immediately called up. Konoha's 35,000 ninja, along with Suna's 28,000 and Fire, Wind Country combined strength of 43,000 samurai, ninja and Ashigaru, they had a total of 106,000 men to combat the alliance. Ashigaru are men and sometimes women who are the militia of the EN, however they are considerably more trained and equipped and technically do not class as such. They are main body of a country's military force with the samurai backing them up. They have no need to ninja due to the villages they contain. Despite their large numbers, they were still greatly outnumbered over 2 to 1 by the coalition due to the sheer amount of nations opposing them. In the duration of the war, Konoha did the brunt of the fighting, being the protagonists. Their numbers had been decimated, from 35,000 to emerge 9,000. Suna had been better off, however, with 11,000 still remaining. The Daimyo's forces remained vigilant and proved a difficult force to oppose, providing a stern line to hold back their enemies, but their number began to dwindle also, now being just 19,000 compared to the 43 at the start. It's safe to say that things weren't looking bright for them. Tsunade sighed again as the volume in the council hall somehow rose in tempo once more, mostly due to the civilian side being idiots. Having finally had enough of their bickering, she slammed her fist onto the table at which she sat. The sound, which was echoed around the room due to the poor table shattering, silenced the room so much so that one could probably hear a person sneeze on the other side of the village. Sighing for hopefully the last time, "Not likely," she spoke. "Thank you, now one at a time please," she asked, and when everyone opened their mouths to speak, "I swear to Kami, as the volume rises above mine for the rest of the duration of this meeting, someone is being thrown out of that window." She spoke sternly and quietly, letting loose a bit of killing intent to put her point across. The counselors looked to each other in trepidation. Apparently none were currently feeling brave enough. Finally one did. "Our forces on the Odo fire line have suffered another attack and are in danger of being pushed back, as have a few forts along our border with Iowa, and they request a resupply as soon as possible. Also a number of outposts along the sea border with Kiri have gone quiet. I sent a few squads to check them out but nothing has come back yet." Shikaku Nara informed. For a change he was sitting up and alert to the goings-on of the meeting rather than sleeping through it. As the Jonin commander, he had a more important role in the war. As such, he felt that he should pay more attention than before thanks to the situation they were in. He wasn't the only change though. The Nara was the only remaining member of his generation's Ino-Shika-Cho trio. Both Inochi and Choza were killed in a rather brutal attack by Kumo and Iwa during the early stages of the war when their team was sent to repel an attack on a key fort while he himself was crippled by the loss of his right arm below the elbow. However, they weren't the only casualties among them. Sume Inuzuka and Shibi Abuame. Sume had fallen in battle, but Shibi had died of illness mere months ago. They were of course replaced by their heirs, Hana, Ino, Choji, and Shino. All among them had greatly matured through the duration of the war and their parents' deaths. Tsunade nodded. Can we spare the manpower to reinforce that front? She asked. Shikaku shrugged, unclear at the moment. We are spread thin as it is. We also can't ask for reinforcements for Suna as they are busy as it is, with their own border with Iwa and also aiding our other fronts. The Daimyo might, but they are dealing with their own problems. We are also slipping further and further away from our supply quota. Because of the pushes from the Alliance, many factories used to mass-produce weapons like kunai and shuriken have had to be destroyed as we retreat further away. Our factories closer to Konoha aren't large enough to keep up the demand. A civilian member spoke up. This is troubling. Without weapons, how will our people fight effectively? Many more lives will be lost because of this. Hiyashi spoke up from his end of the chambers. Can we ask Suna or the Daimyo for any spares they may have? Ino asked, he head resting on the bride of her fingers. No, we are already doing so. If we were to take more, we would be digging into their primary supplies. Another civilian said. The room was silent while they considered the complications from this. What we need are more allies. A voice finally spoke up. Tsunade raised a delicate eyebrow. Of all the people, I would never expect you to say that, Danzo. She mocked. Said cripple frowned slightly at that. When the fighting had reached its most brutal, the man figured that working with the village rather than against it was most likely going to improve their survival chances, even if it was marginally. While I admit I dislike asking for help, Tsunade snorted at that, I realize the trouble we are in. Despite our strength and resolve, it is unlikely that we can hold like we have for more than a couple more months, if that. We can't go on the offensive because of the manpower we would need to make it worthwhile. Includes practically the entirety of our remaining forces, and that's not including the casualties we may suffer along the way. If we are to survive this war in any shape or form, to continue being a hidden village, we need help that isn't already in need of it themselves. He explained calmly. Many within the room caught the survive rather than win in his explanation and couldn't help but silently agree with him. While I hate to say it, you are right. Tsunade admitted to the shock of the council, as she was the one to fight tooth and nail against him. But who would ally with us? We have nothing to offer that won't put us in a more precarious position than before. Besides, there are none who would. Almost all the nations on the continent are already against us, and those that are not either want no business with us or are among those that were originally allied with us. Shino said, monotone as usual. The room was silenced again after his words began to sink in. What about the West? Hana asked. Ah yes, the West. They inhabited a large part of the continent west of both Iwa and Suna that most in the east either ignored or didn't realize existed in the first place. It came as a surprise to most when they appeared, as many hadn't known how big of a landmass there actually was, including Suna and Iwa. The land seemed constantly at war, much like theirs was before Konoha was formed and the other villages followed. However, that all changed when they received a missive from the west declaring that the Empire of the Golden Dragon was a sovereign nation formed of the warring provinces of the west. A map was included with the missive detailing the borders between the N and the west so their own could be changed accordingly. That happened just over a year ago now, and so far they had been silent. Due to the war, the EN was rather distracted to react to the new superpower that had literally appeared without warning. They hadn't even known that a war was taking place to unite them until it was all over. The rumors even said that it was all started by one man who had risen to the top and slowing but surely created an empire right under everyone's noses. Why would they even help us? They have no reason to, and we have nothing that they most likely they don't either. Choji asked. Tsunade looked saddened as a particular thought crossed her mind. Well, not exactly. There's one thing we could offer. She muttered. Which is? A civilian asked. She sighed sadly. We could offer to become their vassals. She said simply. There was a pause after she spoke when pandemonium erupted within the chambers. People started shouting, declaring that they shall never lower themselves to a vassal. Even Danzo, the man who started this, was among them. While this happened, Tsunade sat silent, almost surprised by her own words. After a few moments, quiet returned when she flashed her Ki to gain their attention. So that's it then. We doomed to fall from an onslaught of our enemies. She whispered. The room was silent for what seemed like hours, each council member thinking over her words. A sigh was heard before someone spoke up again. I for one would like to grow old and watch my daughters have families of their own. If we have to be a vassal to another nation to accomplish this, then so be it. Hiyashi said with conviction, but also defeat was present in his voice. I vote to contact the West for an alliance on the terms we become their vassals in return for military and economic support. He stood to the surprise of the room. The Ino Cho trio looked to each other. Despite being different generations, they still trusted each other to stick together no matter what. Nodding, they stood as well, confirming their position on the matter. One by one council members stood until there was just over half among them. The rest were still adamant about not becoming vassals, Danzo among them, who frowned at the decision of the council. So we are decided then. The council nodded, some more reluctantly than others. Tsunade nodded as well. Very well. Anbu. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, while I was reading this, SpongeBob popped into my head. Naruto laid awake listening sound of tweeting birds who sung in the early morning. He smiled slightly when he recognized their sound from the ones who visited him often. He liked to do this in the mornings as it helps him relax and mentally prepare for the day ahead. He went to get up but was held back for some reason. When he looked down, all he saw was a mess of indigo hair in disarray across his chest. Arms were locked tightly around his waist, and he felt their legs entangled under the bed's sheets. He smiled again when he recognized the form as Indigo. They had stayed up late last night for the celebrations of the anniversary of the Empire's formation. It was then that he realized that his head was pounding rather heavily. Probably from the sake, he theorized. Entangling himself from the rather comfortable position, he sat at the edge of the bed for a moment to gaze at her sleeping form before rising and walking to the balcony of the room that they inhabited. Throwing open the doors, he took a deep breath of fresh air in hopes it would calm his hammering head. Walking forward, he leant on the rail of the balcony to gaze at the wonder that was the capital of the empire. His empire, he reminded himself. 8 years had passed since he had left Konoha and his old life behind, and he truly couldn't be happier. The capital was an island city that sat within a large lake at the center of the empire. Walls reached to the edge of the water itself, leaving much land within to be used and exploited, and they had done so. The island was 1.5 times the size of Konoha, and it was filled to the brim with houses, shops, parks, hot springs, you name it. Each building was made of white marble, which gave of a bright and cheery feeling that Naruto couldn't help but bask in. 4 bridges connected them to the mainland, one for every compass point, along with ferry posts to take people across if they wished to avoid the busyness of the streets. The island the city sat on was a mountain itself, so the city was adapted accordingly. There were 3 levels to the city. The first was the civilian and shopping district. This was by far the biggest and the busiest of the sectors. Here a good 80% of the civilians of the city lived, as such the shops and markets were incorporated for ease of access. The second level was smaller than the first, but it served a much bigger purpose. Here the city's military was stationed, barracks, armories, research labs to name a few. Although training grounds were outside of the city for obvious reasons, the West's armed forces operated out of here, making it also a hub of activity only surpassed by the first sector. Many civilians also lived here if they worked within. The last sector was by far the smallest but also the most important, for here the gem of the city sat. The Imperial Palace. It was by far a masterpiece of architecture and design, made back when the Empire originally existed. Like the rest of the city, it was refurbished for the purpose of being that beacon of strength and unity that it once was. Hoseki. That was what it was named. Jewel was a rather fitting name for the city, Naruto thought when he first saw it after the refurbishments. He watched with uncanny interest as the city slowly but methodically woke up and got about the daily lives, smiling as he saw people interact with each other, smiling, laughing. For him it was heaven. He stayed there for a while, blissfully watching them begin their day. The birds visited him while he watched. He had become a sage thanks to the teachings of his dragon partners, allowing him the ability to talk to animals on a small scale. It was much like learning a language. Well, it was to him, so he got better the more often he did it. After finishing a chat with a particularly talkative sparrow, Naruto felt slim arms wrap around his waist and a body press against his back. He smiled warmly as he instantly recognized the body and turned around to face it. Injigo had matured greatly over the years. She'd become much more elegant than before. Her figure was now that much more mature. Her figure was more pronounced and shapely. Her once growing bust was now that much more fuller and defined. Her hips were narrow but still stood out, and she had a rich bubble butt that worked well with the rest of her body. Her eyes and hair seemed even more vibrant than before. All in all, she was a beauty that many in the West coveted. She sighed happily in his arms. "You're up early," she said simply, relaxing in his arms. "What's wrong?" she asked, looking up into his eyes. "Yes, up." Injigo was not the only one to mature over the past years. Naruto was no longer the short stack that he was once renowned to be. Thanks to his training, the war and a healthy diet, he stood at 6 feet for a large height compared to many others. He wasn't lanky, however. Dense muscles filled his body, giving the impression that could defiantly hold his own. His eyes were a rich ocean blue that was speckled with violet, his Uzumaki genes kicking in, he joked. His golden blonde hair was still the mess that many adored, but it held some semblance of control that just made it look right. Red strands danced within, making his head appear to be alight with fire. His whisker marks faded slightly, however, as he grew, but they were still a prominent feature on him among the various scars that he had attained over the duration of the war. He smiled gently and leant forward to plant a kiss on her forehead. "Nothing, don't worry. Just couldn't sleep," he answered softly. Injigo giggled before reaching up and kissing him gracefully on his lips. "It's my job to worry. You're my husband, silly," she murmured into his lips before kissing him again. Husband. Naruto, much like he was still coming to terms with being an emperor, he was still baffled at the fact that someone loved him enough to marry him. Shortly after having united the West, it was decided that an empress was needed to stand by his side and help consolidate their power. When Naruto popped the question to Injigo, she was so overjoyed that she actually squeezed Naruto into unconsciousness. He chuckled mirthfully at recalling that particular memory. Once they had finished their short battle of the tongues, they moved back into the room to get prepared for the day. Despite being the heads of an empire, they both didn't like a lavish life, having both grown up far from it. The room was large, making it look rather Spartan compared to if it were small. A large 4-poster king, emperor-sized bed dominated most of the room, made of elegant mahogany wood. A large wardrobe and dresser stood in one end of the room, while of opposite a door which led to a large bathroom. Two large, ornate whitewood doors were the entrance and exit to the room, standing opposite the bed which was centered at the back wall. In summary, it wasn't too posh for them, but was made to look as if someone important lived in it, which they did. Naruto sighed heavily and leant back in his seat. Having finished another lot of paperwork, he felt pity for the other cages and what they had to deal with. Being an emperor, he certainly had a lot to do to keep it running smoothly, but thankfully he managed to push the more trivial side of things onto department heads, and they would send a report every month detailing anything that had happened. But they didn't mean there was little to do. Stacks of paper, reports, arguments, offers, and requests lined his desk from beginning to end. He had been at it for some hours now. He was only a third through. Thinking back, he couldn't help but wonder why he wanted to be Hokage in the first place if this is what he had to deal with. He thought back to this morning, the feeling he had which kept him up most of the night, and some of the morning. Even though while he was distracted with work, the uneasy feeling in his stomach stuck with him. Taking a look around the room he occupied, he couldn't help be melancholy about the similarities it held with the room the Hokage worked from back in Konoha. Sets of shelves lined the walls, each one of them filled to the brim with books, scrolls, reports, documents. Among a few were scattered around without any order. The ceiling was a large map of the EN and the West, each nation highlighted with its own color and insignia. In front was a single door which served the entrance to the room. Behind him glass doors led to another balcony. Before he could ponder further, however, a knock came at his door. When given the "Enter," an elderly man opened the door and Naruto stood to greet him. "Guro, how are you today?" he asked joyfully. The elderly man smiled. "I am well, your grace. These bones still have some life in them yet," he said playfully. The man had been at Naruto's side during the entirety of what was called War for the West. As such, he was Naruto's personal and most trusted advisor. He worked directly under him, as the only people above his station were Naruto and Ichigo themselves. "The council are ready for you," he informed, smirking slightly when Naruto groaned. He knew how much he hated them. Sigh, "Fine, let's get this over with," he said, standing up and moving around his desk. While the council was much better than the ones back in the EN, there were still 18 members that were a part of it, which led to some rather lengthy meetings. The council chambers were rather bland, which was strange for the company it held. The only decoration that it was a large table placed in the center running the length of the room. 9 chairs were placed either which were currently occupied. A table was sat at the head of the other with 3 large decorated chairs. These ones were currently unoccupied. The occupied seats held the members of the Imperial Council. "Okay, before we begin, there are 18 members. I will not spend hours making up appearances for these people because you may only be seeing them a few times. If you want people for these voices, then feel free to make your own images for them." There was no real order to where people sat, as often they just sat where the nearest free seat was. The members of the council include Dokaro Shinzo, head of Army M. Kai Magabe, head of Navy M. Suzuki Bacon, head of Culture M. Amada Tori, head of Research F. Sugoi Anri, head of Finance F. Yumasaka Iyako, head of Agriculture F. Milsugi Kojiro, head of IndusRT M. Kuramato Izo, head of Nobles. The owners of the provinces in the West had their own small council to manage their lands together. They elect someone to represent them on the council bi-monthly. M. Kia Hane, head of Commons. Much like the nobles, the people had their own council to run things like business together. They also elect someone bi-monthly. F. Horanatsuo, head monk religion M. Junko Suayaki, head of Justice M. Sasaki Umi, head of Commerce F. Funai Igao, head of Health F. Sawaya Chikao, head of Education M. Fukaya Chikao, head of Public Relations M. Arata Kai, head of foreign relations F. Vazumi Shika, head of espionage and counterintelligence M. Haruma Tokuhei, head of black ops M. Few write all that down. I sure as hell did. There was a low muttering of noise within the room, made by the counselors discussing trivial things to pass by the time as they waited. They didn't need to wait long, as after a few moments later the doors were pushed open by the door sentinels. They were black-clad samurai covered head to toe in armor. At their waist they carried a katana and wakizashi, while in their grip they held a naginata. They were among the many that guarded the palace and city wall. The samurai in the light, the ninja in the darkness. Yes, ninja. While the main forces of the West consisted of samurai, and Ashigaru filling the role of the former militia. Naruto realized early on in the campaign that he needed people to fulfill the darker side of the war, such as assassinations and rather questionable interrogation methods. Thus he let his Eastern side come to play. He picked 100 men and women and personally taught them the basics and advanced aspects of being a ninja. He then gave them scrolls so that they could mold themselves how they saw fit. These were the first original ninjas of the West. Thanks to brutal training regime they were extremely talented and experienced thanks to the war. Although they were reserved to the role of the shadows, they were more than capable to provide an unwavering front line should the need arise. In total they boast strength of the 2 eastern major villages worth of ninja. Following the opening of the doors, Naruto and Goro strode in. Goro's attire hadn't changed since the war, himself finding no need to. However, Naruto's had, due to his new position, battle clothes, was considered improper and could be considered insulting to those who he met, if they took his attire as him showing that he didn't consider themselves important enough to dress up. Of course this had to change, otherwise a lot of problems would be caused. He now wore a burnt orange hakama torso with a black aikido covering his legs. On his feet were simple sandals. The sleeves on his hakama were long and baggy, made to conceal seals on his arms containing an whole manner of items. The room hushed as both walked around the table to sit at the very end, one, filling 2 of the 3 available chairs. The third unoccupied one was for Injigo when she participated in the meetings. Okay, I call this meeting into session. Yumasaka-san, start us off. He called in a strong voice after sitting down. The head of agriculture cleared her throat before standing. This month's harvest is nearing, so we should expect a rise in food. However, the quota has fallen slightly in the western sector due to the raids by the Corsairs. She spoke. Due to the large area of land they held within their borders, they split the land into 5 different to better manage it. The north held the main body of the farming due to its fertile soil. The west was a mainly commercial and trade sector, as it contained the largest part of the coastline and the richest city in the west thanks to its large port. There was a large fishing fleet as well, bringing in food from the oceans. The south was mainly a sandy and rocky area, as it bordered wind country. Part of their land carried on into theirs. However, it hosted many mines filled with precious metals and jewels, making it a prime example to be an industrial sector. The east was where their military was heavily invested because it ran along the border. To the east it was well defended. The central sector was primarily the capital city and a few miles of land surrounding it. The Corsairs were a faction which most of the pirates had a connection to. They had somehow taken over a small archipelago of islands off the southern coast of their own borders. When they had formed, they happily took up the role of that thorn in the side, just to be a nuisance. They had no way of fighting them, as a navy had not been needed or even thought of, though one was already being put together, and they had began fighting back, showing just why they were pirates and they weren't. I see. Do we have enough stored to cover the losses? Naruto asked. She nodded slowly. Yes, but it will be close. It arguably depends on who the rest of the harvest goes. However, we should be okay. She answered, looking through a few documents before her. Naruto nodded and let the next person speak. it continued like that as most of the other heads had to only report that things were going well and had nothing of significance to report. That all changed when they got to the military heads. Okay, and I dread to ask, what's happening in the East, Shika-san? Naruto asked. Said head of intelligence sighed exasperatedly and shuffled some papers in front of him. It appears to be heating up further, and now Konoha and Suna appear constantly on the back foot. However, this is not the worst of it. As soon as it became apparent they were whining, the AKA have become arrogant in their power and have seemed to have finally taken notice of us. I've received reports of a few scouting parties from Iowa poking at our borders. It seems your fears about the war spilling our way were warranted after all. He reported, becoming rather solemn towards the end. Naruto's eyes hardened and narrowed immediately after the last sentence was complete, and the temperature within the room seemed to drop dramatically. Being from the East, he knew firsthand what they were like. Many within the room had waved him off when he first voiced his concerns. Now, though, it seems as though his gut feeling might have been right after all, adding to the countless times it already was. No matter how much he wanted to believe it wasn't. Naruto hummed as thoughts flew through his head. He turned to Shinzo. What's the state of our forces? He asked him. Shinzo stood and nodded to Naruto, who then pressed a seal engraved in the wood of his table, making a map of the En and West replace the larger table. The other heads also stood to get a better look. In Shinzo's hand he held a long stick, where he got it from no one knew, and pointed to points on the map as he spoke. We have one battalion stationed on our southwestern coast repelling the Corsairs, one is stationed at Uzu along with a detachment of ships, and the other is on loan to Spring Country to help deal with a sudden rise in missing nin and bandits that have appeared. He spoke, pointing to the areas as he did so. As in Uzumaki, Naruto was able to access the island that his clan originally inhabited and turned it into a fortress from which he could launch attacks due to its strategic position between fire, water and lightning countries. Of course none of them knew that. How long until another battalion is ready? Guro asked. Both he and Naruto had joined the others at the previously large table. Depends on the results of the next war games. Shinzo answered. War games were basically the Western version of the Chunin and Jonin exams. Rather than a written exam, survival exercise and then a small tournament to be promoted, it was different here. In a large area the size of a couple of cities based in the eastern sector was an arena where two or more sides had a mock war between each other, where the combatants were put into the roles of which they wanted to obtain to see if they had the ability to advance in rank or if they weren't ready yet. It also helped to create bonds within the many soldiers that normally wouldn't mingle with each other. It proved to be an effective system and occurred every 6 months like the Chunin exams. However, to be eligible to advance you had to already have experience in the rank they held currently, as remembered the disaster that was the Chunin exams when he was still in Konoha. The ninja held the same ranks as in the East as it was an effective systems, but they looked different to differentiate between the East and West easier. The samurai were similar to the ones in Iron Country as there wasn't much reason to change. An example of change in the ninjas is the flak jackets. Instead of getting them when they make Chunin, they get them when they are genin as part of a uniform. The way they tell which rank someone is, a replacement for the headband. It was deemed to Eastern, and they wanted something different to identify them. They eventually decided on a military beret in different colors. Genin, green 1 year experience to advance. Chunin, blue 2 years experience to advance. Jonin, red, elite Jonin, red W. White stripe. They weren't promoted but awarded and asked to join. A bit like the guardian ninjas of the daimyos in Anbu, named Ryu Gado or Dragon Guard, black. Again they were asked to join. Anbu captain, black W. White stripe. Promoted after a review of service. Samurai held different ranks much like the nin based on where they were in regards to their teachings and combat ability. Their armor was black but they wore colored sashes around their waist to show their rank. Apprentice. Green. Refer above. Blue. Junior. Red. Master. As you may have noticed, the color also shows one's security clearance and place in the command structure. For example, a chunin and junior samurai hold the same rank. A battalion was made of 25,000 soldiers. 10,000 samurai, ashigaru and 5,000 ninja. A platoon was made of 1,000 samurai, ashigaru, ninja. A squad was made of 1 red 3 blue 1 combat medic, 5 if you can't count. Therefore a battalion was made of 25 platoons which were made of 5,000 squads of various soldiers. In other words, a bitch to organize, one of the downsides to such a variety of troops. So 3 of those amounted to 75,000 soldiers already in active duty. This of course doesn't count reserves that retired after the war. Guro nodded at his answer and stayed silent for the rest of the meeting, much like Naruto, who only spoke up to end to dismiss them. Moments later only Naruto and Guro were still stood inside the room. What do you think? Guro asked, turning to Naruto now they were alone. I think that my feeling this morning was not bad indigestion from last night's party, he replied, walking out the room, leaving Guro to think on his answer. Do you understand your mission? Tsunade asked, staring down at the ninja assembled in the council chambers. Kakashi nodded. Myself, Sakura and Hinata will attempt to persuade the West to ally with us on the terms of being their vassal. If we are unable to attempt to obtain as much information as we can on their forces and other vital components. Anko, Kiba and Kurenai are our backup should something go wrong. He explained. Tsunade nodded. Good, you begin as soon as you leave these chambers. Good luck, she ordered. The 6 ninja before the council bowed deeply. It seemed things were finally moving into place. Kakashi and the others could help but stare up at amazement at the city they were heading towards. They were currently standing at the beginning of the eastern bridge connecting the mainland to Hoseki. It was just so different from Konoha that they couldn't help but admire it. Seeing as part of the mission was reconnaissance, they had ditched their standard shinobi attire and dressed as simple travelers, merchants. Kakashi had even ditched his mask in favor of a scarf that settled over his face. Hinata had contact lenses in as her pale eyes were rather rare except for Hyuga, and Kiba had blusher on to hide his fang marks. So far they had got this far unhindered, but they were entering the capital of the West, so they had to be careful. What they didn't know was that as soon as they stepped into the West they had been followed by Western Anbu throughout their whole journey. Naruto sighed and set down another report. The number of probing attacks had grown in number, and they weren't performed but just Iwa either. A few Kumo squads had been seen and a number of Kiri ships have been sighted near the coastline. Naruto rubbed his eyes for probably the 10th time in the last minute alone. He only looked back up when he felt a chakra signature enter his office. Kneeling on a knee before his desk was an Anbu captain, dictated by the black beret he wore with the white stripe. He wore full black clothing, with standard Anbu-styled pants, black sandals, short-sleeved black t-shirt along with a black flak jacket peppered with pockets, and a half-face mask with white markings detailing a snarling dragon. It was complemented by gray pouches for scrolls, kunai and shuriken, a tanto across his lower back and fingerless gloves that reached to his elbow along with gray almost back arm guards. This was the standard uniform for anyone in Anbu. The other levels of ninja had more relaxed taste in uniform, but the same beret and flak jacket was present. Naruto's eyes hardened immediately and he sat straight in his chair. Report. He ordered in his Emperor voice, dubbed loving by Injigo. Tenno-sama, the 6 eastern shinobi have just crossed the eastern bridge and have entered the city. Your orders. The Anbu spoke quick and to the point, still in his position kneeling on the floor. Keep following them for now, and wait to see what they're up to. If you so much as suspect any espionage being committed, apprehend them and bring them here. Understood, Naruto ordered. The Anbu yelled a quick, "Hi," before disappearing in a black plume of smoke. Naruto sighed deeply again before standing and walking to the balcony and stepped out into the fresh air. It wasn't long before he felt their presence enter the room behind him. "And where have you been?" he questioned. "Around." A voice answered simply. "I hear we're about to have guests." "You hear correctly, 6 of them to be precise." They were both silent for a moment. "You knew this would happen." The voice spoke, closer this time. "Obviously. I would never be able to keep my past catching up to me. Naruto stopped abruptly and sighed again. "You hoped it wouldn't be this soon." The voice finished for him, now right next to him. Naruto nodded mutely. "Will you stick around for the show?" he asked. "Of course I will." The voice chuckled. "I can't wait to see them eat their words." Naruto chuckled as well. Said group of guests were looking at a statue before them in solemn silence. It was made of simple bronze, but what I depicted was what saddened them so. It appeared to be a memorial to the people lost in the war. The centerpiece was clearly a samurai by the armor he wore and the katana he held. He seemed to be shielding a child which could be seen hiding behind the man. Another man stood to the statue's left, holding a pitchfork in the air and had his mouth open as if he was shouting something. And finally there was a man in the back. He was partially hidden by both the samurai and the farmer. All they could see was the military beret he wore and the half-face mask. He was holding up a kunai in a ready position. It seemed that the West had shinobi as well, something to report then. "All right, here's what we're going to do. We'll split up and gather any information we can and meet back here in 2 hours." Kakashi ordered, having been given command of the mission. The others nodded and they all walked in different directions, never noticing the shadows themselves splitting to follow them. 2 hours later, after meeting back at the statue, they walked to a nearby cafe to share their information and plan on what to do next. "Right, that's the last of it," Kakashi said as he finished writing on a scroll and proceeded to seal it on his forearm. "What now?" Anko asked rather impatiently, nibbling on a plate of dango she had ordered. "The smartest idea would be to try and see if we could get an audience with the Emperor. It is the main reason for this mission anyway," Kurenai suggested. "Why not just sneak in and force him to help us? He's probably just an old cripple who rose to power." Hiba wondered, never the one for diplomacy. Hinata shook her head. "That would hinder our case rather than help it. Besides, that palace is probably the most defended place in this country," she reasoned. Sakura nodded in agreement. "We do not need more enemies as it is. Should the West join in the war on Orochimaru's side, we wouldn't survive to see the next month, never mind becoming a vassal, both girls ever the diplomats." Kakashi looked between all the team members to gain their opinion on the matter before nodding in conclusion and signaled the waiter for another round of drinks. There were many shinobi and samurai in the cafe with them. It seemed to be a popular place for them to relax, so when 5 shinobi with black berets and 3 samurai with red sashes entered together, they weren't at all concerned. That however changed when they stopped and formed a perimeter around their table while waving off the waiter who had come to give them their drinks. All noise in the cafe stopped as they watched the confrontation. "Konoha shinobi, by order of the Emperor you are under arrest on suspicion of espionage conducted against the Empire of the Golden Dragon. You will come with us willingly or you shall be subdued," one of the shinobi asked. This one had a white stripe on its beret compared to the all-black of the others. Hiba, unfortunately for the others, looked like he wanted to fight his way out, however he was quelled when he received a glare from every single person in the cafe, and he realized just how outmatched he was. "Good choice," one of the shinobi muttered. No one was sure which, but they understood the meaning behind it. They didn't have the upper hand here, so it was better to cooperate for now. They filed out of the cafe and were herded towards the palace at the top of the city. As they went past, many passers stopped and looked at them, whispering between themselves. They were ignored, however, and soon the streets began to clear of civilians and began to fill with other shinobi and samurai, along with the occasional ashigaru. They continued on, higher and higher, until they reached the ornate doors of the palace, which was made of a black type of stone. It looked rather strong, made to beat back any attack on them. The door sentries opened the door for them as they neared, and they walked seamlessly through. The entrance hall was very grand. The room itself was almost as large as the arena in the stadium back at Konoha. Large detailed columns held the ceiling up and were laid out as if to frame an imaginary pathway through the room. Along the walls were pieces of art detailing this and that. For example, a golden dragon fought alongside a suspiciously looking nine-tailed fox against an army larger than the city itself. Another depicted a grand battle between two sides. The size of the armies and colors suggested it was the same battle as before. They were led to the side of the room where a big table sat, where along with some more samurai stood waiting. Before they could even begin to protest, they were roughly restrained and the additional samurai set to work, discovering and then confiscating any hidden weapons on them. Once everyone had been checked, their hands were bound together with ninja wire and they all felt a slap on their backs. On a hunch, Kakashi tried to access his chakra but found he couldn't even feel a glimmer of it no matter how hard he tried, and his eye widened marginally. But that was it took for one of the shinobi to notice. "Chakra seals." "Surprised," he said, looking pointedly at Kakashi. He didn't need an answer to know he was. "Your village isn't the only one with knowledge of sealing," he continued cryptically. Once that was all said and done, the white-stripped shinobi nodded to the other shinobi, who bowed slightly before disappearing in black smoke, an apparent dismissal. The shinobi then led them through the palace halls with the samurai flanking them, making sure that they didn't do a runner. Not that would get far, but that's not the point. Eventually, after a lot of twists and turns, they ended up at a single door in the entire hallway. The shinobi held up a hand and their party stopped before the man walked up to the door and knocked twice and slipped in moments later. Naruto sat at his desk reading over a requisition order when there was a knock on the door. He didn't need the person on the other side of the door to state themselves. He had sensed them when they stepped a foot into the palace. With a withdrawn sigh, he placed the order down and bid the man to enter. The Anbu captain did so moments later. The shinobi walked forward and kneeled before Naruto as before. "Tenno-sama, I have brought the shinobi as you have requested if they were found gathering information. It is sealed into the gray-haired one's forearm and I elected to let you deal with that." "Your orders," he reported without having to be asked. Naruto nodded once to the shinobi. "You did well, bring them in, but stay. After they are dealt with, gather the council, I will need to speak with them," he said before standing and walking to the balcony where his back was turned. He heard shuffling behind him as the Anbu stood and then opened the door. Footsteps followed soon after and eventually both stopped as the door closed and for a while all was quiet. "Why did you come here, Konoha shinobi?" he asked, his voice cold and unforgiving. When Kakashi entered the room, he couldn't help but compare it the Hokage's back at Konoha and the similarities between the two, but summed it up as a coincidence. When he gazed at the form of the emperor, that tingling feeling of familiarity at the back of his mind came to the forefront. And when his voice broke the silence, that tingling became a roaring storm that he couldn't ignore, and it seemed the others felt it too. "Tenno-sama, we came as part of a delegation from Konoha to seek aid in the war against Orochimaru and the other shinobi nations that have allied with them." Kakashi spoke humbly. "Does that include gathering information for your own purposes and I quote, sneak in and force him to help us? He's probably just an old cripple who rose to power." "Not really helping your situation, is it? Conspiring against a nation you want to help you," the emperor said, his back still turned. "Besides, what would I get out of it that I do not already have, other than more bodies to bury? We came to offer to become a vassal of your grand empire in return for protection." Hinata said. The Emperor chuckled. My, you must really be desperate if even the Hyuga are willing to let go of their independence. Hinata and the other immediately stiffened in the revelation that he knew. Ha ha. Yes, I know who you are, fools. You thought I didn't know. You think that I wouldn't recognize the very people who hated me for simply existing. All the shinobi from Konoha froze at that proclamation. What? Hiba managed to stutter out. The Emperor whirled around to face them for the first time since they entered the room. So tell me, why I shouldn't just let you burn. He growled, looking into the eyes of his former compatriots for the first time in 8 years. Each had grown noticeably older between then and now, and the way they carried themselves just screamed shinobi, a stark difference from when he left. He guessed war would do that to you. Oh shit. The situation perfectly was summed up by Anko in 2 words. Kyuubi. Hiba snarled and made to jump at Naruto regardless that he couldn't do anything with his hands tied and chakra sealed. He didn't get far, however, as the samurai standing behind him reacted faster and restrained him further before he could move a foot. A large bellowing laugh echoed the room, drawing their attention away from Naruto and towards corner of the room. In said corner lay a horse-sized orange fox with glaring red eyes and 9 tails. Fuck. Oh shit. The previous statement repeated, this time by Kurenai. This caused the fox to release anther laugh at their horrified faces. Ah, that was good, I needed that. Thanks Kit for letting me watch, now I'm hungry so I'll catch you later. He said as he stood and walked out the door, purposely displaying his 9 dancing tails to the Konoha shinobi. Once he left, they turned back to Naruto with shocked looks on their faces. Well, Anko had a grin on, but that's beside the point. Why, you're not. Kyuubi. Sakura managed to stutter out. Hallelujah. Only took you 22 fucking years. Naruto yelled, throwing his hands in the air in apparent frustration. Naruto. Kakashi was abruptly cut off. Save it, Hatake. Naruto spat. I've managed this far without you. I think I can manage a little longer. Naruto sighed and stretched to release some stress. Hey Anko, how things? Naruto asked with a smile on his face, turning to the only person in the room that he liked. Anko smiled herself and shrugged. Same old. I've suddenly got lots of prisoners to extract information from, so there's that. She shuddered pleasurably. Naruto grinned at her. I bet. He turned back to the others, his cold apathetic mask slipping seamlessly into place. Now what to do with you? Quote. He said to himself. He tapped his fingers against his leg in a random rhythm that he found helped him think. He nodded to himself as if coming to a decision. Well, it's your lucky day, folks. I've decided that killing you, as nice as it would be, would just make more of a mess than I'm currently willing to clean, so you get to stay in our premier holding cells right next to the T&I section so you can listen to their screams all night long. How does that sound? He grinned at them. It wasn't the warm Cheshire grin he used to give though, it was cold and unfeeling. He suddenly clicked his fingers towards Kakashi. Said man was then brought to his knees by a swift kick to the back of his knees and found an arm wrapped tightly around his neck in a headlock. The others, bar Anko, tried to help, but they were restrained in the same way immediately after. Let's look at that arm, shall we? He said, walking round the desk and towards Kakashi. He knelt when he got within reaching distance and stripped back Kakashi's left sleeve, revealing the seal in his left arm. Naruto inspected the seal for a few seconds, looking for the key. Kakashi shivered when he looked into his eyes. That analytical gaze reminded him so much for his sensei and his wife that it unnerved him seeing it in their previously sunny sun. Naruto hummed to himself as he charged his index finger with chakra and pressed a specific point on the seal, causing it to unravel before their eyes. Once it did, the scroll sealed inside poofed into reality above it and was deftly caught by Naruto's swift hand. He stood again, waving a hand to the guards as he did so, causing them to let go the of Leaf Shinobi. As he walked back to his desk he opened and read through the scroll containing all the information that had acquired during their time in the city. Not bad. Good to see that your information gathering skills haven't slipped. He complimented before throwing the scroll over his shoulder as it burst into golden flames. Not that it would serve you any good, but it's the thought that counts. He stared into the eyes of each shinobi before him. Knows this, the West will not involve itself with the pettiness of the East. Take that back to your council. Take them. I have nothing more to say. The guards bowed in acknowledgement and grabbed their wards before dragging them out the room. Naruto held up a hand to the samurai guarding Anko and the man obediently stopped and stood back at a respectable distance. The others sent Anko worried looks but she ignored them. Naruto gestured towards a chair for Anko to take it, which she did. Naruto disappeared under the desk for a moment before popping up again, this time with 2 bottles of sake and saucers to go with them. Care for something to drink? He asked, putting the items on the table. Anko smiled but held up her bound hands with a shrug. If you're willing to let me loose. Who knows how much trouble I'll cause. Naruto grinned good-naturedly and held up a hand sign causing the wire to snap off Anko's wrists, who then rubbed them to get the feeling back. So tell me, how are things really? He asked, filling the saucers with sake from one of the bottles. Anko sighed. Truthfully, not well. After you left, things have been getting harder since the villagers believe that they only need to be rid of me to achieve peace in the village no matter what I do. The fact that Orochimaru is pretty much the reason why we are in a war in the first place doesn't help. She explained after taking a sip of her drink. Naruto nodded in understanding. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm slowly losing the few people that see me for me, and I may love the village but it's not my home. She finished her sake and put down her saucer, which was quickly refilled. The two sat in complacent silence for a while, just drinking until both bottles were finished. Naruto stood and walked round the desk. Let me have a look at that mark of yours, he said. Anko tensed immediately and grabbed at her shoulder where Mark was. But under the comforting gaze of Naruto she slowly relaxed and let him approach. Naruto walked round behind Anko and drew back her coat, exposing her seal to his eyes. For several tense minutes she sat there patiently as poked and prodded at the mark on her shoulder, all the while mumbling underneath his breath. After a minute or two of illegible mumbo-jumbo, at least to Anko, Naruto stepped back and rubbed his chin. I hate to say it, but I see why they called him a genius, he murmured as he walked over to a bookshelf along the wall. You can't remove it, Anko said quietly. She sounded heartbroken. Naruto chuckled. I never said that. He fingered over the bookcase looking for something specific. He may be smart but he's no seal master. The problem with the seal is that fact that it's multi-layered, and removing them one by one would most likely kill you or permanently leave you a potato. He abruptly stopped and pulled a small black book from the shelf and started flicking through it while walking back to Anko, adding to the fact that the bastard has left a little piece of his soul in the seal makes this more complicated. However, I have the cumulative knowledge of 2 of the best seal masters to live, so this is really a walk in the park. Well, for me anyway. Naruto stopped on a page in the book, looked at it for a moment before flicking a few more pages on and pressing 2 fingers to the page. A puff of smoke later and a seal tag appeared in his grip. Of course it doesn't help that the mark is a small piece of the seal. He handed the tag to her. Put that on. Closing the book he put it back on the shelf. So it will take a small while to make my own array to remove it, but in the end worth it. He smiled at that. Anko looked up from where she just finished putting on the seal tag. Honestly, she asked, hope entering her voice. Naruto smiled and nodded again. But Jiraiya, she started before being cut off. Jiraiya may be a seal master by normal standards, but not by Uzumaki ones. There are 10 levels in the standard seal index, in the Uzumaki one there are 18. There is a reason why we were so feared. Naruto politely corrected her. He turned to the only samurai in the room. "Take her to one of the guest rooms, and get her a change of clothes and something to eat." The samurai bowed and left with Anko trailing behind, giving Naruto a warm hug as a thank you. When they left, Naruto went and sat back at his desk. He stared at the wood for a moment, just tracing the patterns before he let his head rock forward and smash into the desk with a loud thud. Things hadn't gone the way he planned. He just wanted the East to leave his fledgling empire alone until they were ready. He wasn't naive, not anymore. He knew they'd come. They were like that, greedy and arrogant. But by then they would be ready. Right now was a different matter. By this point, with all the thoughts running through his head, he never heard the door open and close. He only noticed that someone else was in the room was when a pair of slender arms wrapped themselves around him. He instantly recognized the embrace of his wife and leant into it, letting her familiar warmth calm his racing mind. She always seemed to know just when he needed her, and he never thanked her enough for it. There was a knock on the door, and with a sigh they reluctantly broke their embrace. A servant poked her head in a moment later. "The council is ready for you, Tenno-sama," she informed before her head disappeared behind the door again. Naruto looked at Injigo as if someone had just killed a puppy in front of him, getting an amused smile from her. "Go on. Start sorting this mess out. Just remember that we will support you in any decision you make. Afterwards, go meditate in the gardens for a while. I'll work on the paperwork you have left so you can gather your thoughts," she offered with a loving smile. Naruto smiled back at her before leaning in and stealing a quick peck on the lips from her as he stood from his seat and then walked to the council chambers, leaving the Empress to finish what he had started. The Emperor entered to an almost silent room as usual. However, contrary to the standard meetings, there seemed to a thick tension in the air. It really wasn't hard to know why. Naruto sat at his assigned seat and rested his hands on interlocked fingers. "I'm guessing you are already of the situation that occurred earlier today." He received varying methods of confirmation. "Good. Opinions?" he asked to the room. The once quiet chamber erupted into noise as each person tried to come up with a solution to the issue at hand, as Naruto listened to each of them with different levels of interest. The two biggest supported ideas were: 1. Do nothing and continue as they were. 2. As word would no doubt spread of the Konoha ninja arriving, and fearing retaliation from the AKC, ordering a preemptive strike on the biggest members. Of course there were those in between, but those were the most important. Neither of which appealing to Naruto. The noise eventually died down as they waited for their leader to make a decision. Naruto sat straight in his chair and looked at the assembled counselors in the eyes. "Thank you for your input, but I've decided. While we won't do nothing, we won't be doing something as drastic as a preemptive strike." He spoke. Shinzo, Magabe. Both men sat straighter in their seats. "I want our land borders and sea lanes reinforced and reserves on notice." They both nodded. Shika, "I want our spies on full alert. I want to know if an attack is happening weeks before it does." Tokuhei, "I want you as a first response, so keep your men and women alert at all times." Kojiro, "We are going to partial mobilization. Make sure everything is in order. Everyone else, make sure your respective sectors are ready for the fallout should the worst occur." He ordered. Once everyone understood what was happening and their jobs, he dismissed them, with him following out in short order. The gardens of the palace were special in the way that they were made. As there was no real space to put them on an island city, Naruto compromised. At the center of the palace sat a room. Originally it was a very small room, no bigger than a cleaning cupboard, and so Naruto used his favorite tool. Seals. First he used them to make the room bigger, about the size of 2 arenas back in Konoha. Then he made seals to make the ceiling transparent to let the sun light in, and other seals to generate a small breeze throughout the room. Afterwards it was child's play to add flower beds and other such commodities, creating a beautiful and relaxing garden in the center of the palace. That is where we find our emperor at the moment. He sat in the Caesar position on a mat in his own little corner of the garden, incense burned in front of him to create a nice calming aroma. He had been in this position for over an hour now, and he was still no closer to solving his predicament than he was when it first arose, and it frustrated him greatly. A strange pop echoed through the small clearing that he sat in, causing him to open his eyes. He tilted his head downwards and noticed a small gray dragon with a serpent-like body and a gray noodle mustache sitting in front of him sipping on a cup of tea. Another sat closer to Naruto steaming slightly, clearly intended for him. "Kashikoi-sama, what are you doing here?" he asked, confused. Kashikoi was one of 8 dragon elders, the leader to be specific. The dragon elders, while not overly powerful, were incredibly wise, having lived for centuries. Together they had taught him about the world that he couldn't learn from people or scrolls and books. But most importantly, they taught him about the sage powers. A rather large boost to his already substantial capabilities, but that really didn't matter to him. The small dragon gestured to the cup of tea before him, and Naruto took the hint. Taking the small cup, he drank from the cup as he waited for the dragon before him to speak. After a moment or two he finally did. "I could sense your troubled thoughts through the bond that we share, my Gakusei." He spoke in a deep voice. It was gravely and hardened with experience from untold generations, yet kind and inviting. "Now what seems to be the issue?" he asked. Naruto sighed in reassignment and began explaining what had occurred in the past few hours. While he did so, Kashikoi waited patiently for him to finish. "I just don't know what to do right now in regards to Konoha. The rest of the EN is simple, all except of that Kami damned place," he finished with a growl. Kashikoi waited still as Naruto took another sip of his tea. "It seems as though you still have yet to come to terms with your feelings regarding your birthplace." "You're wrong. I hate that place. They have done nothing but hate me just for existing," he yelled defensively. "And yet," he said. Naruto slumped forward. "Decorum forgotten, and yet there are people there I still care about. Tsunade, Shika and Shino, Shizune. The Ichirakus, to name a few. They're still there and it's their home too. Gigi died for the village, and so did my parents. I just can't let the past go, no matter how much you or others tell me," he said sadly. "I can't forgive, but I want to forget. I want to be better than them. Better than they'll ever be. And you are. Look at what you have created." He gestured around him. "With just a few seals and a bit of ingenuity you have created such a beautiful and peaceful place. But letting an entire village die because they were scared of what they didn't understand makes you no better than them, because you are scared of the feelings you don't understand either. You want to hate them, yet you cannot bring yourself to do so." He took a sip of what remained of his tea. "Show them that you are better than them by proving that you don't let your demons control you as they thought you did. Show me that you can finally bring peace to this war-torn world by becoming at peace with yourself." He spoke passionately. Naruto looked down at his lap and closed his eyes in thought. When he opened them again, Kashikoi was gone along with the cups of tea, and although he cursed the small dragon for disappearing on him, he was grateful for finally clear up his chaotic emotions. Standing up, he smothered the incense and walked out the gardens, heading to the first place where he could fix the problem. He had some planning to do.